Hello and welcome back to Metropole Grid. My name is Andre, and today I'm joined by a very special guest. This is Ysengrin, also otherwise known as Jeff. How's it going, man?
It's going great. It's great to be on.
So for those who might not know your channel, you've been making content and you've been streaming for a while now. Do you want to just quickly plug a bit, just so people have some idea?
Yeah. Sure. So I started streaming a little bit, I guess actually a year and a half ago at this point or something like that, where we were trying to run the Itinerant Protesters, which was just an open testing group to try and get us to be better at playing Netrunner and focus less on deck building and more on deck playing and piloting. And since then, I've been doing a lot of kind of content because it turns out making content's a lot of fun. Since then, I've also picked up a role at Dise as an online event coordinator. But this has been one of the primary things, making this kind of Netrunner content has been a lot of fun. And I've also did playtesting for Borealis, or Midnight Sun, I should say, which is a lot of what we're going to talk about. Well, not the playtesting itself, but the cards of Midnight Sun is what we'll be talking about today.
So this is actually part 2 to a video series. The first part will be on Ysengrin's channel. The link to everything will be down below. I recommend you check this out. But basically what we're doing is we're on a kind of surface level going through all the 65 cards of Midnight Sun, the new set that has come out at this point about 2.5 weeks ago. We have played with all the cards, right? And we're going to talk about what we think about these cards in terms of a standard evaluation in a standard competitive Netrunner, how viable we think they are on the top tables of, again, the standard format. We will be shouting out startup when it's relevant, but we got some tier lists. We're basically going to be dragging boxes into lanes and telling our opinions on why we think so. Real quick, Jeff, do you want to explain our different tiers? Because this is the same language we used in the past video.
Yeah, so in the first video, we go through some debate about what we should name these, but these are the names we landed on. So Ban Me Please are the most powerful cards. These we think are going to be shaping the meta and are potential ban candidates. It probably won't actually be the cards that get banned, but you never know, right? Because sometimes incidental cards get hit instead, but these are the ones that are shouting out in power. Faction Staple means whenever you're building a deck in this faction, and sometimes even out of faction, this is a card you're going to be looking to slot in, and really you're probably going to look for reasons to not include the card rather than to positively, the card's just going to be in your list and you're going to be having to argue to take it out.
You mentioned this last time, but some of these cards are not the most powerful cards in the faction, but they're the most fundamental cards in the faction. That's a really important distinction.
Yeah, that's a very good one. The next one is, I think, actually where most of the cards ended up last time. We'll see how that ends up on the Corp side, because I think Corps and Runners were constructed a little bit differently into what roles their cards did. But the idea of an archetype role player is not that this goes in every deck, but that in a particular style of deck, this card has a very important or commonly included role. Next up, we have Niche. This is a card that is niche. It's not very good, but you can include a couple of niche cards without making your deck significantly worse, and they will do stuff generally that's helpful for you in certain situations. They just tend to be less useful than some of the stuff in the archetype role player faction staple.
In our runner side, we ended up with a lot of what people call tech cards in our niche slot. And these cards are actually really good. We talked about how they could be in certain matchups the best card in your deck if they're the card that stops you from losing to something that's hard to interact with. So keep that in mind. They're not bad cards often, but they're situational usually.
And then finally, we have Shame. These are cards that, they will probably beat me at some point. I've already lost to a card that was in the Shame pile. These cards they're hard to see play. Their rewards aren't that high when you play them, but they could have other redeeming qualities. But generally, they're not that great for a competitive standard, which is the main focus of this tier list.
Yeah, the sort of cards I'll be surprised to see while casting a tournament. Excited, but surprised. So on that note, we have 35 cards. This is bigger than the other side. The other side, we still had a lot of stuff to talk about. So let's start here. And we're starting with HB. And HB, mind you, has, I think, the least cards out of any faction in the set. Now, for those who don't know, Jeff, you play a lot of HB. You've been grinding ASA for a really long time specifically. So is it cool on my side that I'll tell you first what I think about these HB cards? I'll lead the conversation, and then you can tell me how you think it lines up to your probably a bit more experienced take.
That sounds like a great idea.
So we're starting with Elvigar Bifurcation. It's a 2/1 HB identity. The card, of course, is on the screen there. It has some text on it that allows you to de-res a card you want, but the big numbers or the big idea between this card and the agenda you can score on the turn it's installed. So I think this is obviously very quite strong. I think you could print a blank 2-1 agenda, and I think a lot of times, I think more often than not, this is a blank 2-1 HB agenda, and there's nothing wrong with that. That is free points. That's really hard for the runner to interact with. If you're on 6 points, it closes the game. It forces pressure. It makes runners act differently. If you're on 6 points, if they do or don't know this is in your list, it's such a big deal. And I think one of the biggest things is there's like 2 really strong HB identities right now that have tempo positive abilities associated to scoring agendas. We're looking at like precision design that can play this as like a free point, and then like attached to it you get recursion from your archives, or of course in sports metal where this thing is just all gas all the time, score from hand, draw 2, gain 2, whatever you want to do. I'm interested to see if this will see play in like more standard ASA lists and this sort of like wider HB stuff that also classically was playing 5/3s. So I don't know how that works into the equation, but I think this has potentially no text. And mind you, you can get incidental value from the text. A bunch of the cards here really care about this sort of thing, but like I think this thing is so strong. What do you think, Jeff?
I know, I agree. This is probably one of the strongest cards, if not the strongest card that HB got in the whole set, I
Yeah.
think. Um, and it's really it is that it's a blank 2-1, but a 2-1 fits so well with a lot of HB scoring patterns. HB, like Precision Design was doing some trying to score out in 3 agendas. They were doing that by doing a 4-2, a 4-2, and a 5-3. But
Classic.
this opens the yeah. This opens the ability to actually do your 4-2, 4-2, 4-2, and then 2-1 with no threat. Or more likely you do 2 5-3s and the 2-1. Like this just opens up a lot of stuff for different scoring patterns for HB. And then sports metal, again, a 1-pointer
Oh
that
my
like
God.
pays for itself is just so much gas for that ID.
Yeah.
So like we've already seen in the circuit opener that was held last weekend that is on my channel, all 8 hours of it, there's a lot of sports metal played there, and basically all of it made it to the top cut. So there's a lot of games of it, and it's very clearly helped a lot by the existence of this card.
I think we'd be foolish not to address the text because I do think we think that this had no text, it would not change how playable it is. The text allows you to derez a card. How do you think that's actually going to be impactful? I think the cleanest option is just to get 2 more cards off a spin doctor on the table. I don't know if there's more
I
to
think
that.
that's I think that's basically going to be it's I think like 60% of the time it's going to be blank. 20 more percent of that time it's going to derez a spin doctor. And then like maybe some other times you'll have some incidental stuff like derezing a gatekeeper if you're
Yeah.
ahead and you want to get that re-res, or you want to re-res a campaign. That maybe is even like 5 to 10% rather than 20. So I think this is, until we see otherwise, pretty blank. And like there is some stuff it interacts with later in the set.
Yep.
I don't think those cards, I don't think those are going to be common interactions that we see all the time.
Yeah, they're a bit too cute for most of the competitive play where again, you're playing sports metal. You just can go really quite fast and not worry about too much else. Where we're putting this, like I'm scared of 2-1 agendas. 2-1 agendas have a huge impact on the
Yeah.
game. It changes how people play. Like I don't know if this is a ban me because it has no text on it, but like it's kind of really, really strong.
It's like this is a super weird one where like banning a blank 2-1 says like it's really it says that the faction's in a really good place if you're
Yes.
banning a blank 2-1. So I think this is a faction staple
Cool.
because I will say like you asked like, oh, does ASA play this? And I think largely ASA doesn't, just because of how they built their agenda suites. So it's going to be a very common to see card in faction. It could see a ban. Like this actually is one of those like weird niche cards where it's like, oh, it's not super fun and spicy, but banning it like kneecaps an archetype in an interesting way.
Yeah.
But I think this is more fits in the faction staple kind of category.
Really a wildly strong card. And hey, we have another HB identity. This is Midnight 3 Arcology. It's a 4/2, so a bit more standard numbers you're used to. When you score this, you can draw 3 cards, which is a weird effect because you're generally not doing much else on your turn. So luckily, this thing stops you from discarding at the end of your turn. Important to know that if you draw with other effects on the same turn that you score this, you don't have to discard anything. So you can end your turn with like 10 cards in hand, 11 cards in your hand, something wild like that. This is a card that I think a lot of people struggled to kind of identify if it would see play, where it would see play in like preview season. Because this ability is strong. It's like another on positive tempo agenda, and HB decks are super efficient scoring these out on the table with seamless launch, and love that ability. The big question mark to me is like, what are you doing with all these cards in hand on the next turn? Like back in the day, we used to have an identity called cerebral imaging, that allowed you to have a massive amount of cards in hand, and it could directly translate that to a win condition by playing like ridiculous combos that don't exist in the game anymore. We also saw cards classically like, what was it called? Successful field test that allowed you to
Yep.
do something proactively with a whole big hand full of things. And like to me, it's like it's definitely good to draw all these cards. Like that's a sports medal-esque effect, but like I don't see what you're doing with the next turn with all these cards in hand besides having better choices and then discarding a bunch of them. I don't get this one. I don't think this is going to see a lot of play.
No, I very much agree. I think like if VLC was in the card pool, I'd start looking at this a little bit
Yeah.
differently where I'm like, oh, if I can like seamless score this, play a VLC, like suddenly I'm like, oh, this is pretty exciting. Or there's maybe some times when you're playing Ace and you're like, oh, I want to score and get my Rashida off because I'm really ahead on the board state.
Yeah.
But I think that like that's a very niche interaction, which is where I'm kind of putting this card in my head. I think it's pretty niche. It feels to me like you know, we saw HB dominating in system in the gateway meta
Yeah.
with a lot of tempo positive 4-2s, and Nisei was like, you know what, let's play a little conservative with a 4-2 just to see if we like this level of power more than the Cyberdeck Sandbox off-world office level of 4-2 power. And this card then feels like it doesn't deserve a spot when we still have access to some of those 4-2s. And it's like, oh, I could score a Vitruvius with a counter instead. And even though I don't get 3 new cards, I get my best card from Archives instead.
Yeah.
So it's just hard to see where this card's going to fit into basically any competitive list at the moment, I think.
So what I'm guessing, because you do see flavors of this theme, and mind you, HB did not get an identity in Midnight Sun, but we're assuming it's going to get potentially one in Parhelia in the next part of the set. I'm assuming that this is going to be a card that has inherent synergy with potentially what the idea is in the future, and maybe at that point we can reevaluate that and say like, oh, it's an HB identity that can do something with a big hand. Exciting. But otherwise, I think that this is honestly niche. I don't think it's an archetype role player.
I think there's an even argument for it being shame, but there's enough really bad 4-2s out there, and this is just, I mean, I was looking through, there's an NBN card that gives you +2 hand size. Like, I compare this to like Superconducting Hub, and it's like, this has almost the same text as Superconducting Hub, costs 1 more to advance, but does give you the extra point. So like, there's some trade-off there that's like.
I feel like if you're comparing yourself to Superconducting Hub, you're not in a good spot.
No, you're really not.
Are we shaming it?
I kind of want to shame this one.
I'm cool. Yeah, it's not something I'm excited to put in a deck over the other options currently, but we'll see in the future because I think that is a potentially strong effect with not a big payout. Like, I wish there's a way to quickly capitalize on that.
Yeah. No, there's lots of historical cards. Like, if Eternal wasn't so whack, there's a lot of cards this plays well with in Eternal, but like it's still not going to see play in Eternal. So,
cool. Let's keep going. We got a campaign, classic HB stuff. This is Refuge campaign, and it's very simple to understand. Res it for 4, trash it for 4. Every turn it gives you 2 credits forever. This is not like, well, it's actually like the old Eve campaign, which is the closest thing we can compare this to, but Eve campaign had a shelf life, a ridiculously long shelf life, but a shelf life. Another card that I think was pretty tricky to evaluate coming in off spoiler season for how little text there is on this card, like how simple an effect it is, because it is expensive to res. It takes a couple turns for this to pay out, which means inherently you probably want to protect and ice this, which is something that like Asa, inherently an HB identity that allows you to install 2 cards and wants to make a lot of iced remote servers, like new iced remote servers. That works out really well. And if you leave this on the table from turn 1 throughout a game, that's a nonsense amount of economy. Like this has to come down sooner than later. We've also seen, we're going to see HB caring about big money. And while this is not an exciting big money card, I think this card is potentially playable, but like, I'm not exactly sure where. It's also like wildly 3 influence. So like it's a kind of a card that other identities might consider splashing. And for now, Maryland, I think is going to be the standard there. I really can't tell what to do with this because I think if you're not icing it up, it's kind of a disaster.
No, I agree. Like this is a card you have to protect if you're going to play it, and its reward is good, but it's not like if I have to protect a card in a remote that I'm going to get credits off of, I have like the option of looking at something like Daily Quest, which gives me 3 credits for a 1 to res cost. There's other trade-offs, so I don't think it's like a slam dunk. Like this is strictly worse than Daily Quest or anything. But this is a card that HB hasn't had in quite a while. I think Eve campaign was a basically analogous card.
Yeah.
But you know exactly where this fits in, I don't think it's obvious. I think generally it's a little bit weaker than Maryland.
Or even Nico,
campaign.
right? Like Nico, I think is also something that gives you a bit more gas. And the idea is if you're putting this like in your remote server and thinking like, okay, this will live there until I put an agenda in it. Like Nico and Maryland have a better shelf life. This thing, you feel bad if you have to
Yeah.
trash it in 3 turns. Like it's not a great economy card 3 turns later.
Yeah, so this is I think like the places I can think about this in standard is in those sort of ASA lists, because all those ASA lists just lost G's, which was a premier card you'd want to sit in a remote.
Yeah.
And like that deck actually wanted to get all of its power out of fully operational, to have two remotes ish that you could just leave an asset in behind an ice for the whole game. So you got 1 to 2 extra triggers on every fully operational. And this card could fill that slot potentially, and maybe allow Ace to shift to some slightly more expensive ice. The other place I could see this is if you want to do that kind of daily quest style deck in something like Architects of Tomorrow, just this like real
Yes.
slow rolling big HB list, and you're like, I need some extra cash, and I really don't know how long I'm going. Like, I'm not playing a square out of a remote. I can juggle stuff with spin doctors or sprints or whatever for a long time. Just leaving this sit here, and I'll accumulate value and accumulate value. And there's some payout for that play style later in the set that we'll see.
I do not care for that playstyle, I'll be honest. But yeah, that sort of idea would play daily quests, and they don't have a lot of influence to spend on it, mind you. So this seems like a really nice home there. Where do you want
Yeah.
to put
So to
this?
me, that
Sorry, go ahead.
this is an archetype role player, right?
Mhm.
I think it's a little bit better than niche, but it's definitely not a faction staple. It's probably the weakest of the 3 HB campaigns in standard, but it's
Yeah.
not like weakest by like a mile. Like I've been playing around with it in ASA just to see how it feels. And
Cool. Yeah, I think ASA is where
yeah,
I'd probably like to see it. Real quick, because you mentioned it, fully operational is actually an interesting inclusion with Midnight 3 as a way to like burst draw and score out. But I still think everything still, gets a bit clumsy once you think what you're doing after that turn.
yeah.
All right. We have an interesting one. This is a champ card from Pincel. This is Trieste model Bioroids. It isn't a Bioroid itself. When you res this, you choose a Bioroid, and the runner cannot break subroutines on that chosen ice. With runner cards, mind you. So they can still click through a Bioroid, and mind you, I think it's like 90% of the Bioroids you can actually click through. So even if you want clicks, is the point here. This card is like another card that I think a lot of players saw this, and it's really exciting because it very quickly allows people to dream up like these like devious machinations of setting up these servers with horrible Bioroids that you think you're going to click through and they hit you in the face. Because a lot of players love having their ice connect, right? Like it's people put scary ice in their deck so it can connect, and this thing kind of helps you there. On its own, though, on an effect, it's weird, and it's I feel like you need to spend so much time in a deck to make this do something. It's hard to put this in a deck, get it into a server, protect it or don't protect it, and then res it at a time that someone's planning to click through something. Like it's asking for a lot to align that I would be hesitant to play unless that's my game plan. How do you feel?
I think that's right. I think this is one of several cards, and we saw a couple of these in Midnight Sun, where their very existence, whether or not you include them in the deck, but the
You're scared.
potential for them to be
Yeah.
in your deck means that the runner has to play a little bit differently. So now the runner, like, yes, generally against HB and just generally good advice in the game is to run early in the turn. But like Trieste is like, if you don't run early in the turn, if you're like, oh, I need to get a 1 to 2 breakers down or play a sure gamble and a breaker, make a run. Suddenly Trieste makes that so much less certain for the runner, as long as you can have this as a plausible threat. But it is then hard to line up because you probably do need to protect this. If you have this naked and then the runner runs it, if you don't win the game off of that Trieste off of that Bioroid firing, and I guess there's probably one case where that could just basically win you the game. Otherwise, the runner's just going to go and trash it next turn, and most ice is balanced so that you can't win the game off of it firing once. And so this isn't going to win you the game on its own.
Yeah.
Um,
So you still have to do a lot of work after that. Mind you, of course, as you mentioned, specifically also Fairchild 3 is now back in the standard meta. And that's something that a lot of people have to click through. And it's hard to like, well, you have to run first click. So sometimes it doesn't even matter. It's interesting. It's also worth noting Loki is the one Bioroid that can be really mean that
yeah.
does not inherently have click through text. So you can make a Loki unbreakable. And that is kind of interesting. But again, it's a
Yeah.
unique card. There's a lot of things that have to line up.
So this being Pinsel's champ card is a really interesting sort of legacy for this, because I think I often think of, and I think a lot of people have this idea that Pinsel is this like optimization, like engine focused player.
Yeah.
And this is not an engine card really in any sense. It's this weird, neat, like gotcha kind of mechanic that the corp can build and the runner has to respect, but only if it's good enough to actually make it into the meta. So it's just this like it is an ASA card, which does suggest to me that it's a Pinsel champ card because he won world championship with that. Though a very different ASA list than like an efficiency list, I guess.
Yeah.
But this is such a hard one to rate. It is such a, I mean, like, I think I would personally put it in niche, but it's niche in the way that a tech card is niche. So like it can have really high highs, but it's going to be hard to see on a play. You know, something I think I saw some people leaping to was like, oh, this will be great in like an Architects of Tomorrow list. I think it largely isn't because it means that you have to have something, you have to make a second server, which is just such a hard thing to do in Netrunner classically if you're trying to make a Glacier deck, because you have to spend so much money protecting everything. It ends up not being, it slows you down more than it speeds you, than it helps you win.
Yeah. It also competes somewhat with like next activation command. Like there's other tricks that do this again that are a bit hard to play, but yeah, I agree with you. I'm totally surprised that this is Pinsel's champ card, and it's a card that I probably won't see, but every once in a while I will, and it will be ruinous. But I'm not expecting it to be everywhere right now. Are we niching that?
Yeah. I think it could go an archetype role. I think it's niche though. I'm not convinced it's an archetype role player, but I'd also like, again, like all the tech cards we saw in the runner video, just because it's niche doesn't mean it's unplayable.
Yeah.
So,
and another thing that's worth saying, just so you understand the format, we're going to have more cards, obviously in each row. From left to right, that will be from top to bottom. So the best niche card will be the leftmost niche card. We'll also move these around throughout the video if we feel like we've misstepped at some spot. Next up, we have an HB Ice. This is Echo. It's a Harmonic Ice, the first of 2 Harmonic cards that we've seen so far. Harmonic cards are synergistic with other Harmonic cards, and whenever you res a Harmonic piece of ice, you get to put a power counter on this ice. Admittedly, it has to be resed for that text to be active, but this ice gains an end to run subroutine for every power counter on it. So the idea is you have a bunch of these, you're resing them, de-resing them, stuff like that, and it generates a bunch of end to run power counters. So classically, historically, there was a subtype of ice called Next Ice, which was also an HB thing. There's actually a couple still left in the standard format, if I'm not mistaken. And one of the first HB Ice, Next Ice, excuse me, was called Next Silver, which was largely this. Next Ice cared about how much other Next Ice you had res, and it gained end the red subroutines. That card is no longer in standard, but this is the revised version of Next Silver. So if you ask me, the HB like Ice Suite, competitive HB Ice Suite has been like very, very solid and hasn't wavered much over the last like year and a half. Like you're seeing the same stuff in every HB list, like your Hagens, your Gatekeepers, now your Magnets to some extent, your big old Bioroids, Fairchild on Cell, Brawn to some extent. And it's Drafter. It's really hard to find a slot in those decks because those decks are generally playing those ice because they're the most efficient, the best face checks for cost. So just about any question with an HBI, especially an HBI that doesn't inherently do anything besides end the run, is this more efficient than a Hagen? Is this a better res in the early to mid game than a Hagen? And I'm not excited about getting a bunch of end the run subroutines. Maybe that's just me.
No, I think I generally agree. I think whenever a card has an ordering dependency, like you want to res this early in the game if you're trying to get a lot of value out of it, this needs to be the first harmonic you res. And then you res, I mean, also with only 2 harmonics, I think it's like just always going to be super hard to get lots of value out of this card. So to some extent, evaluating this card when presumably there's going to be some harmonics in the second half of the set, it's going to look like a different card. But having an ordering dependency where if I'm having to, like if I put this on HQ and the runner's like, okay, I'm going to go run R&D, I'm going to check your remotes, it's just, and I have to res harmonics over there, I'm losing a lot of potential value. And that maybe feels worse than it actually is. But I think the real issue I have with this card is that, yeah, the HB Ice Suite is really fixed with a lot of really efficient res to break kind of either punishes for the runner for face checking or just res to break costs. And this isn't going to do that. By the end of the game, yeah, this has 5, 6 power counters for a 2-cost ice. Like, that's fantastic. But that's also a little magical Christmas land.
That's the point. I don't believe most like 90% of games. Okay, the question I guess is, how many next dice do you think you're going to res at the end of the standard HB game in the modern standard format where the games aren't very long anyways, right? Like maybe
Yeah,
3?
yeah, yeah. You have. It's also like I need to rest this first. So if I have when we talk about the next harmonic, we'll see that
Yeah.
there is some actual way to make it a little more reliable that you do see this card, but you're not necessarily going to see it as the first harmonic you get to res because you don't get to choose when you res these ice. The runner does. You have to kind of coax the runner into interacting with you to get the value out of this card. That
Yeah.
said, having now just shat on this card for like a minute straight, it does have a thing. I think it's interesting in that vanilla has rotated. So this card could potentially see play in the decks that were running stuff like vanilla, where you're just looking for a cheap end the run effect to make the runner go and get their barrier breaker.
Yeah.
Um,
No, I hear you. And the thing that like I have to compare this with an HB is things like Hagen, right? Because Hagen, mind you, is twice as expensive as this, but Hagen has a real face check. Also on turn 1, if people are paper clipping out a Hagen, it's 5 credits for them. Echo at some point is going to cost 5 credits to break with a paperclip, but I don't think the game is going to get to that point. Like that's the problem is like, can you spend 2 more
Yeah.
credits for Hagen? Because Hagen has a better face check, is more taxing in the early to mid game, which is generally how long you think the game is going to last. And so for this, like it just doesn't make a lot of sense to
Yeah.
me.
No, and the other strike against this card is it's 0 strength, so it doesn't even really keep out Amakua, which is the other thing I'm looking to do is like I want the runner to actually find their barrier breaker, but this says as long as they have credits, they'll get in with basically any AI breaker, but Amakua is one that is like the big one to talk about in the standard format.
Yeah,
So,
and Hagen eats Amakuas, right? Like it's again, I'm on
yes.
Team Hagen 100% of the time. This is
Yeah,
weird.
it's weird. It's like, oh yeah, I could rest 2 of these instead of a Hagen. I'll have 1 ice with 2 on the runs and 1 ice with 1 on the run. I don't think that's better than a Hagen most of the time.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah, it's really strange.
so
I do think that this is something we're definitely going to have to reevaluate. Mind you, at some point there was like 5 or 6 next dice in the format classically. I'm assuming we might see a next century in Parhelion. And again, if there's more next dice and they're all playable, this stuff does just strictly get better. So it's not the end of the road for this thing.
yeah,
Do you think it's niche or shame? I think
I was thinking niche. I feel hard.
yeah,
It feels weird putting a card that's so clearly
fine.
looking for support, and like it's okay. Like
It's a fine card.
Yeah, if I can make a reasonable suite of ice that's mostly harmonic, this card starts looking pretty fine.
Yeah.
Like, oh yeah, a tutor res thing that will be reliably have 3 in the runs by the mid game is a really good piece of ice. So I think yeah, bottom end of niche for now is appropriate.
Yeah. And that's the thing is like, it's not bad by any means. It's just, there's better stuff to be playing.
Yeah.
Okay. Let's go look at our next harmonic. This is Wave. Also costs 2 credits to res, a bit higher strength. And this has an interesting subroutine, gain a credit for each res piece of harmonic ice. That potentially can scale up well. But I think the cool thing about this card is that when you res this ice during a run, you can search R&D for an ice, add it to your hand. Shuffle, show it. I think you reveal it, right? Yeah, you reveal it.
Yes.
This thing is actually, I kind of like this one better, which is weird. I think for 1 influence, even out of faction, that's an interesting effect because it's an ice res that has an okay subroutine that is tempo positive, that gets you the thing that you want on any board state. I kind of like this one better, even though it definitely doesn't keep people out of servers.
No, it's like it's an HB version of pop up that has some really exciting text because like ice tutoring is a thing that has historically been really really bad, and I think this is a possibly justifiable ice tutor. The ice tutoring cards that have been printed have been really bad. I think especially in a meta where you're expecting like Amakua and Boat, it's like, oh, maybe I have some ice in my deck that's specifically good against particular runner matchups.
Yes.
Because usually when you're building your ice suite, you're like, yeah, okay, this card's not great against, for example, MK Ultra, but I have this other card in my list that's really good against Black Orchestra. So I'll go grab like a thimble rig with this instead of grabbing my drafter or something. But against Shaper, maybe you swap that around. And so this allows you to play slightly more situational ice. And the runner probably doesn't have to break this until you have 2 or 3 harmonics res. So it's probably going to end up just making you money back for its res cost. and that's if you can build a deck that's okay with bleeding some centrals, which a lot of decks can kind of figure out a way to do, this ice starts looking kind of appealing.
Is this like good enough ice to do like the remote servers for ASA where you're just putting assets and stuff that are like inherently not the highest target to trash?
It might be, honestly. That might, like, it's the, oh yeah, you can trash my refuge campaign, but I'll make another dollar back, and then I'll put something behind it next turn, and you have to ask yourself, is it worth giving me a dollar again?
Yeah.
Um, it's hard because slots in ASA are so tight, and you've already got like
The best ice.
9 to 11 ice that are like auto included, and it's like, okay, do I go to some extra ice for this? Do I have to cut some of those slots for this? It's really hard for me to actually put it in ASA.
Yeah.
But it seems like that might just be a block of like, oh, I could actually run either less ice or swap it out to get the ice that's most impactful. Um,
Yeah, I think you're totally on the money there. Like, I love the fact that now people can make decisions on what ice they get for the matchup and like have this like, smart plays. Again, also on one influence, I think this could be interesting. Maybe you're splashing one big influence ice. You want to see it every game. Like, not bad. Honestly, not the worst, but like, I don't think this slots easily into modern HB. But I could
yeah.
see this making room somewhere.
Yeah, and one important I don't think anyone will have missed this, but like it does tutor any ice,
Yeah.
not just a harmonic ice,
Yeah.
which is a big deal. And yeah, if you have an influence or two left over, like actually,
Not the
as I
worst.
say that, I'm like, should I be looking at this in op over Maryland campaign? I wonder. But I don't know.
Yeah, it's weird. Of course, this is also really good with harmonics. Allows you to make sure you're resing more harmonics, and if you res this
Yeah.
first, then get your what's it called, your echo. You're in a good spot.
Yeah.
This is interesting because I don't like. There's no archetype that I think it's inherently supporting, but I think it's good.
Yeah.
I can't tell where to put this thing.
I would put it in archetype role player. The yeah. I think is it ahead of refuge campaign?
I'm more interested to
we've
play
got-
with it in the refuge campaign.
Yeah, I think I am too. I think even though I've played more Refuge campaign than Wave
Yeah.
post set release, I think Wave is the more likely to see play card.
Yeah, it's an interesting card. It does something unique, and that thing is powerful. So we'll see how we can deal with that.
Yeah.
We got one more ice. It's a Bioroid. It's Hakarl 1.0. It's pretty expensive. It's okay strength. It on its own, it's a 1.0 Bioroid. You can click through it. It gives a core damage and ends the run, and then has this like ridiculous text. When you res this, you may de-res another card. If you do, the runner can't use paid abilities printed on Bioroids. That largely means they just can't click through them. This was the card that was in our Midnight Sun booster pack that came out like 2 months ago, just to give us a couple cards to tide us over. And I think this card being in Midnight Sun booster pack was like one of the biggest, I think, approval stamps to make it clear that Nisei thought HB was really good then. Because for me, the Midnight Sun booster pack was like, here's 6 cool cards to play with, and then here's Hakarl.
I don't disagree, but
Yeah, no.
but yeah.
Okay, so in short,
Yeah.
I don't like this card at all. In terms of its like strength to subroutines to cost, it's not very good. Specifically, like Paperclip is the standard breaker for barriers in standard lol. It goes through this for what, 3 credits. That's not amazing for a 5 credit ice. Admittedly, this has a real face check, but if you pay 1 more credit in standard, you're already playing with Oncel, Braun, Fairchild 3. Like there's so much better. That's more taxing, that has better face checks, that's harder to deal with.
Yeah. So yeah, and also in HB you have a cheaper barrier that is arguably much more punishing in Hagen.
Yeah.
So it's
that they can't click through.
I mean, yeah, I think this whole HB set kind of looks like, hey, HB was really good. Let's like give them some wacky tools rather than giving them a bunch more strong tools. With I think maybe we see one obvious exception, and I think we're going to get to the other one after this. But yeah, this card's like, it's got some funky stuff you can do with it, but it's not convincing to me that this is going to see much of any play.
Yeah, I don't want to like, because I think I'll definitely rant about it, but like the text on it is definitely fascinating. The ability that it's providing you is like kind of niche. Like not that often people are clicking through stuff, let alone clicking through a thing on the turn that you've already res this. Like it's asking for a lot, but the ability to de-res things, I think that this card could potentially see play in a deck where de-resing something is incredibly powerful. It's the same thing with like the 2-1 agenda. It's like you're probably going to de-res maybe once in a while Spin Doctor, and that'll be okay. You can de-res a Harmonic Ice, but then you're paying like 7 credits again to do all this stuff to get just like a couple more power counters on things.
Yeah,
I'm out. Like I don't like this one at all.
Yeah. I guess I'm going to ask you then, does
Mhm.
this go in niche or does this go in shame?
I think this is the lowest, probably the lowest card in the Set on Corp side currently that I've seen.
Okay, that sounds like a shame to me then.
Yeah, I think that's a shame for me. I really don't like this one. Um, yeah, it was cuter for a while when we had what's it called? That Weyland grid that
Surat
lets you.
City Grid.
Yeah, for like a
Yeah.
month, but it is what it is. Last HB card. Whoa, big deal. 17 credits makes it the most expensive corp card in the history of Netrunner, but only the second most expensive card in the history of the game. Some really like frightening words on this card. Terminal, remove this operation from game, has a trash cost. All signs that something here is going on that's really, really powerful. Basically allows you to put 4 counters on a card that's installed, and you can still score that card if able, because this thing ends your action phase or whatever they call it exactly in the Netrunner rules. This thing was really fun. It was like slow revealed through spoiler season, and it's an absurd effect. It is an incredibly powerful effect that's actually accurately costed at market rates, largely. You'd assume this thing to cost about 16 credits if you did it manually with biotic and advancements, which is really cute. Oh man, card is busted. 17 credits is a lot of money. And currently, or classically, there's not that many HB decks that can like, bring that much money together in a really meaningful way. But if they do, they win the game. So it doesn't matter how much it costs, because ideally, once you play this, the game is over, right? It's not like you have to worry about your future where you're very broke. Does this see play? I wanted to.
This is like a card that like I think during the like people were hypothesizing like what could cost 17 terminal and end the game, and came up with these wildly strong effects.
Yeah.
And this feels much more pedestrian than a lot of the proposed cards that people were floating.
Sure.
But I think you're correct that it is saying really probably 18 credits, because you're going to install and advance your agenda and then play your big deal. Yeah, it's going to score a 3-pointer, because that card will have 5 advancements on it. So the best thing you can do in slot most of the time is going to be scoring a 5 advancement 3-point agenda. And if you've already had 4 points, that's winning you the game. And that's classically the hardest. Those last 3 points are the hardest points for the corp to score. And this just solves that problem, which is a big deal.
Yeah.
So like this card's really impactful for that reason. But 17 credits and trashable means that there's a lot of room for interaction. If the runner can just keep making you
No, sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off. I just wanted to find time to say it. Admittedly, this being a trashable card this is the faction where that is the not the biggest problem at all, right? There's so much recursion built in with precision design, with archive memories, right? Like trash it. I'll just bring it back with the Vitruvius. Exactly.
Like, yeah.
So whatever, right?
Yeah. It's the interesting thing about all of those except Project Vitruvius is the runner gets 1 turn to go and get it again.
Yeah.
Which I think is some interesting gameplay. So this card like does a lot, but all of the HB decks we've seen for the last 2-3 years are constantly like they're basically yo-yoing between like 3 and 12 credits, and they just keep going up and down and up and down. So they make a lot of money throughout the game, but they never actually are standing on a lot of liquid cash. It's been like NBN and Weyland that historically sit on a lot of cash. So if you're putting this into an HB deck, you have to redesign the archetype and the money game plan of the whole, like relative to every other deck that we've seen in standard for HB for 2-3 years at this point. So it's hard to just go like you can put this as a 1x and just say, yeah, sometimes this is just going to be my out in a game.
Maybe,
and that's a really impactful out. But you have to kind of think about like, yeah, I can't take what is this? Almost like you can't just click for credits and get to 17. No. It's just not going to be that's so many turns from basically any amount of starting credits. So like even if you're on 12, it's like, oh, I'm have 4 turns where the runner gets to do whatever they want.
If you ask me how are you getting to 17 in HB, my answer is fully operational or bust. Is that the case?
Yeah. I think that's the case. The interesting thing about that to me, the other option could be something like I've seen some fully operational combined with stuff like NASX or
right. Yeah. That's cute
to just kind of do a big burst all at once if the runner can't keep your board state down. And that's sort of the way you make it work. The challenge is a lot of good runners are really good at keeping down ace of board states. And so you might instead want to look at something like, oh, maybe I can play like an Architects of Tomorrow. Again, this list that you hate.
Don't do it. It's not fun for anyone.
Of put a daily quest in a big beefy remote and then just wait until you have 34 credits, play this twice, score 2 5-3s and a 2-1, and make everyone want to quit Netrunner.
Yeah, if that's the case, I'm not excited about this deal. It is also worth noting that as a fast advance piece, this one's actually hard to interact with because install advance, they have to clot immediately there before you even spend anything from hand, which is good. Let alone you could fast advance a 4-2 by just installing pause for effect. That's nice. I like that.
Yeah. Yeah. The one thing I will also note is this is the only fast advance tool that if the runner has the last paid ability window on. So, for example, if I have I'll use we're not going to talk about the card yet, but let's say I had a Cyberdex Virus Suite, just now rotated. We have a near print of it. I install advance. I then say I'm going to the runner has a clot on the table. So I now have to res my Cyberdeck Sandbox and purge and then pass the paid ability window back to the runner.
Because you have to end your turn?
Then they could... because after I play a terminal event, there are no more paid ability windows on my turn. So if the clot was on the board, I still couldn't score. Like, even though the text of Big Deal says you may score, the clot would prevent me from scoring.
That's
so I
wild.
need to get the clot off the board before. So if the clot's on the board and the runner has a symbol chip, I actually can't score with the Big Deal. I have to install advance, purge. They can put the clot back out, and then I sit there and twiddle my thumbs.
That's ugly. That's really ugly.
Yeah, so it's really interesting that this like high cost premier event gets stopped by a little 1-cost piece of hardware in the right board states.
That's wild. Where are we putting this thing? Like, obviously it's incredibly powerful. I just don't know how consistent it's going to be, but like potentially faction stable. I don't believe it's a faction stable.
Yeah, I think it's the top end of an archetype role player. And it may also be that we see it in like Weyland or something like that, like an outfit Weyland that's just like, instead of like splashing for kill, I'm just gonna I'm gonna like play a bunch of too big to fails and then make a big deal at the end.
It's like I've been considering that, but of course this card is 5 influence. But the biggest deal to me is like that deck loves audacity. If you're going fast advance and you want to trash this with audacity, it's a nightmare. Oh my god.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's wild. All right, so that's all the HB stuff. This does seem a bit bottom weighted, but I do think a big part is that HB didn't really need that much support going to Midnight Sun. Not that a lot of players would like to have seen some, especially to like support different archetypes. But currently, not looking like the best faction out of Midnight Sun so far. What do you think?
I think they might still be. I mean, I don't think they're the best faction, but I think they have a claim to still be a very good faction. They just won't be playing a lot of new cards.
That's what I meant. Sorry,
HB cards.
I meant best faction in terms of new cards. I think HB is still quite good.
Yeah.
Okay. Now, Jinteki, I think, is the faction that probably needed the most support going into Midnight Sun. It's a faction that, like Nisei, I think, has kind of changed over time what they think it should do. And they had some pretty bold claims going into Midnight Sun. So let's start with a pretty bold agenda. Blood in the Water, an X2, potentially a 0-2 agenda that X, mind you, in the corner is equal to the number of cards in the runner's grip. So that can go from anywhere between 0 to maybe 8 sometimes. Who knows? Wild. What do you think?
This is such a weird card to evaluate, and it's pretty freaking wild. I think like the deck that this goes in at the moment that we know of is Personal Evolution, obviously. Yeah. The really weird thing about this agenda in Personal Evolution is it does a couple of things that Personal Evolution doesn't like, and a couple of things Personal Evolution really likes. So if you're just trying to play like I'm going to slowly grind out the runner game plan, this being worth 2 points is actually pretty bad for you as Personal Evolution, because the runner's never going to be ending their hand. Like if the runner has fewer than 4 to 5 cards in their hand at the end of their turn, it's probably because you've depleted their deck first. And so you're never actually scoring this like on tempo as a grinder list. So, and then it lets the runner win off of stealing fewer agenda. So it's not great in those sorts of lists. But for the PE lists that are looking to do sudden spikes of damage, this card really sings, where you're like, oh, I scored a sting. You we're smart to not, end your turn with 3 cards in hand, so my Sting doesn't flatline you, but this does now. Or like you can set up lots of interesting plans with this Blood in the Water if you're going for a little bit more of an aggressive one.
Yeah,
Now, if that deck is actually better, it's really unclear at the moment.
but the point of this is like it gives PE like a really easy way to end the game if you're on 0 cards in hand. Let alone 1 card in
Yeah.
hand, you can score 2 of these out and you're done. Because Personal Evolution doesn't net damage anytime an agenda is scored or stolen. So this is like, oh, install advance, install, score. Like that's not only is that 4 points really quickly, maybe that wins the game, but like this gives Nurly EMP back in not exactly in like in a non-grinder way, in a way that's like hard to like abuse.
Yeah, I just really like this is we don't usually talk about like the design of these. We've just been talking about the power, but I love the design of this card.
Yeah.
It's so interesting to think about in play, and like the decks this slots in is very different, I think, from where you maybe initially think about putting it.
If I'm playing against any Jinteki deck that I'm expecting there to be a snare in, I'm always keeping like, I don't want to keep 1 card in hand or 2 cards in hand even, because they can do install advance, score 2 points. That's like wild. Like you don't want them to do that. So you're trying to keep cards up. The one big question mark about the card to me is that whether this can see play in just like mid-range tempo-y, like Panic Pilana type Jinteki kind of decks that like every once in a while somebody beefs it into a snare and ends their turn on 1 or 2 cards in hand. Because the upside of that is obviously very strong, but then the downside is that this is largely a 5-2 agenda, which is going to be avoided at most cost.
Yeah, a 5-2 with blank text is pretty tricky. Not necessarily unplayable because it has modes when it's not a 5-2. And like for those sorts of decks that are trying to be like, I'm going to use tempo net damage, like, oh, the turn after the runner goes and steals your oboe, they're probably not ending on that many cards in hand, especially if you're like, oh yeah, I'm going to data loop into an oboe. And like runners do have tricks to go and steal that, but they probably don't have tricks to steal that and then draw up to more than 3 cards, or at least not that often. So this might become a 2-2 in those sorts of decks, and that might be like, that sounds potentially quite good.
It's so like in terms of our board here, like it's obviously a huge archetype role player. In Personal Evolution, you have to respect this at all times. I would love to put it into Faction Stable because I think there's a lot of Jinteki decks that could consider this. I don't know how you feel.
I feel like this is more of a role player to me. Like, I don't think this would have seen play in Panic Pilana. Like, I just don't think it would even come close to a slot.
The other 4/2s are really good, yeah.
An off-world office, like whatever. So to me, this is an archetype role player. It's a very good archetype role player.
Left or right of Sam Swade?
It probably is still. I think we're going to see more of it than Big Deal.
I think so.
I think if PE is a real deck, then we're going to see a lot more of it. And
mind you, Personal Evolution for the last couple of months was banned in Standard, so a lot of people are playing it because they liked it and it's back. So you're going to see a fair bit of it for sure.
Yeah.
All right, another agenda, really interesting one too. 3/1, love this art, Regenesis. It has a fair bit of text on it. Basically, when you score this, if you can reveal a face down agenda in archives that largely has been there at least for a turn, because if you trash a card, this effect doesn't work. You can add that agenda to your scoring area. And add means you don't get any of the text on it, no when scored abilities. You just largely get a huge chunk of points. This potentially is a 3/4 agenda, which is unheard of. How hard is it to score this? I think there's some like really reasonable ways to do this in Jinteki without having to bend over too far backwards.
No, I completely agree. I think this is in play testing where we were like, okay, people are going to be trying new cards. That's a big point of play testing. I know this is a big deal. This is going to be a thing. It was still hard to stop the court from getting these off with some, level
some
of consistency.
yeah.
It wouldn't be every game, and that's sort of the mark against this card is like you can't. It's really hard to do a guaranteed setup, but there's a lot of board states where like the runner presents a really hard fork to the runner, and it doesn't even have to it's not always going to be what's on the table, but it can look like it's what's on the table in a lot of cases.
And look what's on the table is such a big deal. Like I've been playing against Jinteki decks on Jinteki.net, and like so often they put a face card, put something in a remote and a card face down in archives. And my response, more often than running the remote, which is probably wrong, is we need to check archives every turn, which is wrong. But like the point is that this is doing something. This is making people play and evaluate board states differently on so many board states. And I love that.
Yeah. The other thing is, and I don't think this is terribly relevant, those people that love Jumon this doesn't stop the text of agendas being active. It just stops when scored abilities from
Yes,
triggering.
exactly.
Which is so there's nothing too exciting you can do with it. Jumon is though arguably a pretty exciting thing. Though you'd probably rather score an Obokata and have 4 points for 3 advancements.
Yeah.
And it's pretty solid there.
I'm interested to see what decks, like what sort of agenda suites show up with this, like agenda in terms of like the point structures.
Yeah.
Because whether you're running just like a bunch of 3-pointers and then 2 Regenesis and hoping that you only score 1-5-3 in Regenesis, like that seems reasonable. But I don't know if this works in a deck with 4 2s and other stuff going on. Like that kind of seems hard.
Yeah, maybe you do the like 3 Obos, 3 Bacterials, and 2 of these, and then just like you feed the runner Bacterial while you have this on the board somehow.
And you fill archives or whatever.
Yeah.
It's cool. It's a really cool effect.
Yeah, it's very cool.
We didn't really talk about how you can trigger this, but in short, there's 2 other cards in the set. There's Anoetic Void, which is incredibly powerful. Hansei Review, if you set it up. But there's some ways to do this, I think, that like don't that are actually a bit less fair than just say face down card in archives, your turn, right? Like I think there's tricks to it, which makes it cool.
Yeah, for sure.
I do think we're going to see, I don't know, like I think this is a card that's obviously much more playable than Blood in the Water.
Yeah.
But I think like more people are going to be afraid of playing it.
Yeah. It's hard. Like to me, it's weird. Like this could plausibly go in niche. But I feel like it's probably closer to an archetype role player to me.
I'm dropping it in here.
That's where I was going to put it as well. I think it's going to be a really hard one to fit cards in around, but that is where it sits, I think.
All right. Keep going. We got Bladderwort. It's an asset. It's a pad campaign. Fantastic. For 1 less to trash. But if your turn begins, you gain the money. Then if you have 4 or less, you also do an end damage. So not only is it an econ card, but if things are not going classically very well financially, you get a hurt back, which is cool. It's also not unique. What do you think?
I think this is a super interesting card. It's like this is we used to have a card that did part of this effect called Bioethics Committee, and that always gave a net damage, but couldn't be protected and didn't give any money. Whereas this sort of is a weird intermediate between like that and a pad campaign, as you called out in its little intro. It's really, I've been seeing a lot of people play this in like all sorts of wild decks because the idea is, oh, I can induce the runner to run because I don't want to lose their cards in the hand. And I'm coming more and more around to the idea that generally as the runner, you just lose a card or 2 in your hand. Like you install, if you have something you can't afford to lose, you just do it and you just leave this ticking because the corp classically being on no credits is not a great place for the corp to be in.
I'll trade a card for them to be under 4 credits, like at the beginning of any turn. Again, the value of that changes based off of damage decks, but like damage decks, like the sort of trap decks, I think are the worst at protecting this. We've seen so many classically like these like value-based, very devious Jinteki assets that would work really well in sort of like a net damage shell. But then the idea is you have to protect them. And that deck isn't very good at having a lot of ice and protecting like your synth DNA modification, stuff like that, right? And this kind of falls into that camp unless you don't res it until it does net damage, and then net damage potentially combines with a Ronin or like a clearinghouse and wins the game. But even in that state, you have to be on low credits, which is kind of hard to ensure.
That said, I think there are some good way that some important thresholds. 4 credits is enough for a snare, which is a big deal. And then Jinteki, most of the cards Jinteki got in this set work at those sort of low credit totals, or like allow you to res at those low credit totals.
The snare thing, though, it's a bit like backwards because you want to start your turn on 4 credits, right? Or end your turn on 4 credits, so they have to respect snare, right? But if snare doesn't fire, you gain the credits from Bladderwort first, so then you're at 5, right? Like that's why this is ugly.
Yeah, no, agreed. So I think the big thing to me is like, can we like? I'm almost like, oh, can I like res a Sansan at the start of at the end, like at the start of my turn, so that then I can get the Bladderwort credit and then have something else give me an extra credit somewhere, so I can install advance, score a 3/1 or something, and still like get all of the value kind of thing.
Yeah,
and that's where I'd expect this list to start looking a little bit more scary, where the corp can, without the runner having to run at them, keep getting value off the Bladderwort while still advancing a board state by resing upgrades and assets that present more and more threats to the runner. I'm not sure that that's where we're actually at, and there's enough threats the corp can build relative to the penalty of being at less than 5 credits.
Yeah, exactly. I think that's a massive penalty. They have less than 5 credits. Like you don't have to worry about Anansi's. You don't have to worry about like the big ice. Like you can start running aggressively and not worry too much. If they hit you with a snare, what are they doing next turn? Clicking for credits. Like it's a real cost. Also, if you have 3 of these, there's a chance the first one gives you net damage, but the second and third are very likely to put you over that 4 credit threshold. So it's not like bioethics, which is what you're comparing it to before, which can be like zap, zap, zap. Like this can be zap, enjoy your pad campaign. I don't know. You can trash it for 3.
Yeah.
It's easier to trash than pad campaign.
Yeah.
It's weird.
Yeah, the trash for 3 is a bit frustrating but you care about them running at you much more. If you're protecting this with some of the ice we're going to talk about, you really want to induce the runner to run at you because that's how you get them to take damage. Because, like, honestly, if the runner can just sit back and be like, I'm going to lose 1 card a turn, and then I'm going to make some, I'm going to wait till you put another threat on the board and then go and deal with that threat instead, this isn't going to win you the game on its own that way. I think.
No.
Even if you somehow manage to proc it every single turn.
Yeah, I still think, though, as long as you are low credits, which, again, there's no way to just dump your credits for fun. The fact that this can give surprise net damage at the beginning of a turn, that can lead to, like, a trap deck type lethal, and that's fascinating.
Yeah.
I don't know if this is an archetype role player. I want to niche this thing. I don't know what you think.
Oh, I actually think, to me, this is going to see more play than Refuge Campaign. Like, I would put this in an archetype role player.
I think you're right about that, but I think Refuge Campaign is probably going to perform better.
Yeah, no, I think that's probably true, though I suspect, like, I've been seeing enough PE that's presenting interesting challenges where this is part of it, though not like the key cornerstone piece, where I wouldn't be surprised to see PE do well for a little while.
Cool. Yeah, PE got a lot of support from this, more than I think any other kind of like archetype in Jinteki. Speaking of like weird potential PE cards, this is Moonpool for the Boreas playtesters. That's you too, right? Did you build this?
Yeah. We had, I forget if Doomrat wrote an article about this, but the design process for this was somewhere between how FFG made those like final magnum opus cards.
No.
But we had a first draft and then we had lots of iterations on it. And like this card does have some signs of being slightly over designed in that it is a giant block of text.
Yes.
And I'll be honest, some of that text is because I kept breaking it when it had less text. So, but hopefully that means it's at least doing something in. It's able to do something without having to get banned or do something that no one really enjoys. I've seen this card already do some really powerful stuff.
It is. So just to explain what it does real quick, is a 3s on just about every part of this card but 1. So 3 cost, 3 res, trash, 3 influence. In short, at instant speed, you remove this from a game and you can trash up to 2 cards from HQ and then reveal 2 cards from archives that are face down, mind you. If they're agendas, you get that many advancement counters up to 2. So it gives you a lot of stuff. It allows you to take cards out of HQ, which technically is relevant. It allows you to recur cards, which is obviously quite relevant. And it can potentially give you instant speed advancements. I don't think we've seen that much flexible utility on a single card, barring Spin Doctor. But of course, Spin Doctor is 1 influence, 0 to res, and draws cards, win res. Like, if you're comparing it to Spin Doctor, I think you have something interesting. But this is not anywhere near as universally playable as Spin Doctor.
Yeah, I think because it's 3 to res, you really want to probably be getting value out of 2 of its 3 functions to really feel like you're not just like going, like you're not just brutalizing your own tempo.
Especially Jinteki right now, out of any faction, I think has the biggest issues with economy. I think their economy is not great right now.
No, I for sure. And like, I wouldn't be surprised if like part of the reason this is at 3 is that you want to be able to give players some leverage. That's not just like, oh, I have to win the roulette. Like, oh, Jinteki has to spend real credit, so they have to play part of the game that everyone else does. PE in particular, which is pretty notorious for like running 0 economy card lists and being fine.
Yeah.
So I think I've already seen this card do some really interesting stuff where it's like, it's now a threat on the board that opens up the expanse for Jinteki, or in particular, Personal Evolution, to spike up a lot of damage. Because if you're running lots of 1-point agendas, suddenly this gives you're going to get those free advancements or those free recursions a lot of the time. And the hand sculpting for if they go out your hand is really good. So like, this is one of those cards now when I'm as the runner, I'm like, I probably want to try and scout these out to see if I can get rid of them if I'm playing against those sorts of trap decks.
Yeah, so one of the big interactions with this is that a runner runs a trap, an advanceable trap, and that at instant speed, you can throw anything out of your hand, hopefully any agendas. It doesn't matter if the game is over when you put 2 more advancements on like a Urtica Cipher and they flatline. So like that's obviously incredibly powerful. I do think the whole idea of like I've players want to play this as just like a fast advance piece and like more vanilla Jinteki lists. And the idea that you have an agenda on the table, this on the table, and 2 more agendas in hand to use this as a fast advance piece, to me that sounds like entirely unreliable. Like I think that's not going to line up at all.
But that's a situation where you're probably losing, and this is like technically a card that gets you out of that situation.
Yeah.
But generally, you want cards that are good in more than just I'm already losing situations.
Yeah.
So,
but this is obviously quite powerful in any deck that wants to deal with traps, because you can move advancements around really, really, really quickly, like clearing houses out of nowhere, Ronins out of nowhere, Blood in the Waters out of nowhere into another Blood in the Water. Like you can do some wild stuff. And PE specifically, as you said, is a deck that runs a lot of agendas where this is quite doable.
Yeah, and for Regenesis, this technically this can help the Regenesis scoring pattern a lot, where at the end of the runner's turn, you can trash the agenda you're trying to score. You just choose to shuffle back nothing, and suddenly this becomes a 3-cost like a 3-cost. This turns 3 credits into 3 points, which is a fantastic exchange rate.
Yeah, this card's cool. If it was less influence, I think you would see it out of faction a lot more. Because there's like Pravdivos, there's a lot of other trap decks that could get value from this. That would be really spicy. But for 3 influence, you're really thinking about it, let alone 3 credits or as. Where do you want to put this? Because like again, it's like this is the issue with Jinteki currently, I think, and not so much the issue, but the way that Midnight Sun seems to look is so much of the Midnight Sun cards for Jinteki support one archetype, which is like net damage Jinteki, as opposed to like the more vanilla, the more like Panic Pilana classic, like mid range agenda focused, value focused to some extent Jinteki. So like, I don't know if we're gonna get over that faction staple hurdle.
I don't think this makes it into the faction staple hurdle. I think this, again, is an archetype role player. I think there may actually be no faction staples for Jinteki. It may just be a bunch of role players.
Which is fine. There's still good cards.
Yeah, that's fine.
I'm dropping it between, I'm pretty sure that this one is Wave. Yeah. You think that's fair? Is that too good?
I think that's, I'm trying to think how, that's probably fair. I think it's like, it and Regenesis are such hard cards to evaluate in a vacuum, and like I think it's going to be hard to put both of them in the deck, maybe, but they're very close in power to me.
I'll make them neighbors now.
I almost wonder if I want to put Wave on the other side of both of those two.
Okay, yeah, that's fair. I know people are definitely going to be playing these. This is like a lot of people are not going to consider it. People are considering.
I think it's. Yeah, I think Wave is more the victim of how strong HB is, rather than like, and it's still a little hard to justify spending 1 influence to splash for some ice.
Okay. Hey, talking about ice, we got 3 Jinteki ice. All of them say the word net damage on it, which is good fun. Anemone on its own, 3 to res, 2 strength, a single subroutine, do 1 net damage. A subroutine you definitely want to break. You don't have to, but you probably should. But the on res text is interesting. If the corp ditches a card while you're running the server and it's res, they do 2 net damage, and that's not a subroutine. So if you don't have net damage prevention cards, which are few and far between on the ground, that's just free old damage. This is a card we got from the booster set. And it's a card that players forget exists, and it's a problem for them.
It's a weird one that people forget exists because if you are playing around Snare, which you probably should be, this should really never flatline you.
It should.
And yet it happens. Especially now that Surat City's grid is gone, there is basically no excuse for getting flatlined by this.
Still happens.
Cut to me in a tournament getting flatlined by this, right? This effect, like this on res get a thing, is something I think we've seen. Actually, I guess we've seen Hakarl and an enemy both do this.
Yeah, Ping I think was the other one before it.
Oh yes, Ping is the other one. Yeah, and this is quite, I think, much clearly stronger than Hakarl, and like I think does a decent amount of stuff. I don't think you have to just be doing damage. Like this could technically fit in a Panic Pilana kind of list. I don't think it often does, but the ability to like manipulate the runner's hand size on a piece of ice, like no no way around it, basically, is an effect that Jinteki has wanted to have. And yeah, the subroutine is nothing. The subroutine and strength is nothing to write home about. But if your opponent's not on Begalter, it's still a real card.
Yeah, so the big deal with this is like we have Jinteki decks that are classically, almost all of them, the mid-range stuff too, is playing Obokata Protocol. That's 4 net damage to steal it, and so a lot of runners do calculations, right? Kakugo, mind you, left the standard format recently, but the idea is like, oh, I have 4 cards in hand, maybe 5 cards in hand. I can run the remote server, Obokata, Hokusai, no problem. And just the existence of this card, and mind you, a card you don't always want to snap res. Sometimes you want to keep it to like protect something later down the line, does goof that math up. And that can be quite interesting and can buy you scoring windows. It can buy you blood in the water kills. Like it can do things. Like it is reasonable. And it's tricky. I like it.
Yeah. Yeah, and also if you put this on HQ, you get a lot more manipulation of what the runner's going to hit. So it may, even though it doesn't say end the run, it might get you 2 net damage and an end the run on HQ because the runner will want to jack out rather than having to potentially hit a snare that flatlines them, kind of thing.
Yeah. Enjoy playing deep dive with this around the meta. Like it's so hard. It's so hard.
Yeah, I like its interaction with deep dive is like a big reason that I think this card might be pretty real.
Yeah,
and be a reason that those sort of, yeah, I mean, I think this card actually does a lot for PE that like, I think those decks would lose pretty hard if this didn't exist against deep dive, because those decks could basically just say, I'm just going to deep dive, rebuild my hand, deep dive, rebuild my hand, deep dive.
Yeah, just dodge the snares. But now this is a harder thing to dodge for sure.
Yeah.
Where are we putting it? I think this is quite good. I think you're going to see this in Jinteki decks.
Yeah, I think this is I think because this has uses outside of just the damage archetype, I'd probably put this in the faction staple category.
Oh, cool. Yeah, nice. All right. Play around it. Make sure that you know this thing exists and calculate around that because you will be surprised by it. Please don't run with 1 card in hand against Jinteki. You shouldn't be doing that anyways, and you'll learn really quickly. All right, Bathynomus, I think these are, I'm not sure what they are, but some bugs of some sort. A reprint largely of the old Neural Katana from the original core set, but with the Archives Matters theme, which Restoring Humanity showed up in System Gateway, but then didn't get any cards that really supported that. It's 3 net damage for a single subroutine, which is wild. 1 strength, most places 4 strength on Archives. 4 strength, mind you, is a lovely breakpoint, specifically if you're playing against standard Anarchs that break this for 6 credits with MK Ultra. That's buck wild. That's a good face check. It's the same sort of face check for Neural Katana that's like potentially not going to end the game for you, right? Like you're generally running with 3 cards in hand against Jinteki trap decks because of snare. That's the minimum. But if this takes 3 cards out of your hand for 3 credits, like that's fine. I don't know if I ever want to put this on anything else besides Archives though.
Yeah, and that puts it kind of a little bit niche probably at the end of the day, is like it's good on one server, but Jinteki has lots of good sentries, and so it's like, and the savings I get over this better than my alternative cards that I could put in that slot? Like honestly, an enemy competes with this in a lot of cases to me, where like, oh, an enemy I at least know is guaranteed damage, and I can put in a bunch of places. And then if I want to spend more money, I've got Anansi, the best sentry in like probably ever printed.
Yeah, a lot more money, but you're right. It does. It's a roll.
Yeah. Like I'm going to expect most Restoring Humanity decks to play one of these. I wouldn't be too shocked to even see something like PE say, "Oh, we'll play one of these because I'm not that rich."
Well, but the way I see it is like this kind of feels, obviously this is like similar to Crick back from the day, but I don't think I'm going to play a Jinteki deck that doesn't at least play one of these. I think it's just going to be like auto inclusion, always play one of these, especially modernly because Amakua is around and well. Like this is a nice thing to make sure that Archives is not a problem for Sable, Amakua, any value-based runner. Like if this is on Archives, that's an incredibly good cost. Incredibly good ice. I think I always play one in every Jinteki deck.
Okay, I'm not as high on that because then there's some Jinteki decks like Panic Palana. I could probably take this like and keep going about my game plan in a bunch of board states, and I would rather like, and again, slots are hard in those sorts of lists.
Sure.
But you're probably right. There's probably going to be one of these in most Jinteki lists, at least for a while.
It's worth mentioning because we've been saying this a lot. Panic Palana, mind you, Palana did just rotate, but it's the idea of this like archetypal mid-range Jinteki deck that has efficient ice, good enough economy, good agendas, and a bit of net damage that people just like. It's a very comfortable deck for people to play, and it's always been okay. It's always been good enough to bring to a tournament. That doesn't exist anymore. So like I think Panic Palana is now unfortunately Panic Restoring Humanity, which means that this thing is a bit better.
That's a good point. That is a good point. Yeah, I get. So I feel really weird putting this in faction staple
I
because
think it
I'm
is.
not convinced it's there. But
In power level, it's not, but in ubiquity, it will be.
I'll let you put it there. I think I will hold my reservations and say
Cool.
I would put this in the archetype role player. I would personally probably put it even like below Regenesis.
Okay, that's a
but
huge thing. Okay, for the fact that you feel that strongly about it, I'll knock it down at least. Oh, but like that's the problem. As soon as it's down here, I feel a lot worse about it because it's not a better card than Big Deal. But I can explain it
yeah.
away when it's up there, right? Because I think it's
Okay. Then put it up. I mean, it's this is the
a
one that's
weird
on your
tier list.
channel. You get final say on all of these.
We'll reevaluate it at the end. If we feel really strongly that we've messed up, we can fix it.
Yeah.
Let's talk about Ivik. This is an AP barrier. It's a reimagining of, again, another core set card called Wall of Thorns. Wall of Thorns saw almost no play. Modernly, it would see exactly no play. 2 net damage and end the run subroutine, but this gets cheaper to res. 7 is a lot. This gets cheaper to res for every other code gate you have res. Mind you, this isn't a code gate. I don't know, man. This card to me is like really weird. I haven't played enough with it, but like just the idea about this. Paperclip exists. So Paperclip is breaking this for 4 credits. What would the res cost of this card have to be for someone to break it for 4 credits and you to feel okay about it? I don't know.
5 or 6, right?
6?
I mean, like,
are we excited about Firewall? Maybe that's something that we just misevaluated for like the last year. Is Firewall worth playing? A 5 cost, 5 strength barrier, single end the run subroutine.
So I think there's a couple of important differences between this and Firewall. Firewall strictly ends the run.
Yeah.
This does something else. So it is actually a spike. Like one of the things I'm thinking about when I'm building Ice Suites right now is, can I put this on R&D and not have Pudma? Just do a value ID bounce off of R&D.
Which I don't think is something Jinteki inherently struggles with.
That's a good, yeah. I mean, that's a fair point.
But you're right. You're totally right.
So like, but yeah, I guess like the other thing to me is Jinteki has one other barrier in standard, I believe, which is Envelope.
Yeah, that's bad.
Yeah, and all the neutral one that they like, their neutral options are border control, and it used to be vanilla. Like you would see vanilla in Jinteki decks just because they're like, I want to get the paperclip out.
Yeah,
and I like don't like I want to have it a little bit past the border control. And so this could see some space in there. And it's not like Jinteki has a shortage of really good code gates to run. Some of them are even really cheap. Like Ike, I think, like basically being saying, oh, every time I res an Ike, I'm reducing the res cost of my Ivik by that amount.
So this is the thing that like the calculus on this doesn't make sense to me, right? Like you don't want to res this for 7 credits, because if you're resing this for 7 credits, you could res like a DNA tracker. I think that's still in standard, but you could definitely res an Anansi, right? For 1 credit more, vastly more taxing for basically every archetype and better abilities. So you want to generally get this cheaper, but the later the game is that you're actually resing this for like 5 credits, 4 credits, at that point, the face check is going to be less relevant because the runner is going to be more prepared for this. So you're basically saying, do you want to pay 7 credits maybe for 2 net damage in the early game where the runner is like face tanking? Or do you want to pay later where it's just going to be a credit tax? Mind you, we also forgot about Chiashi, which is, again, is a fair bit more expensive than this, but I think is the other barrier you'd consider in the slot. I don't know, man.
That's a good point. And like I think my points on it maybe make a little more sense in startup. I think all of your criticisms land really, really correctly. Like I think you're correct here. I think this is gonna see almost like essentially 0, maybe even actually 0 standard play.
Yeah. But in startup, there's no paperclip. It's such a big difference.
Yeah. For startup where it's like, oh yeah, I mean like, yeah, Cleaver still gets through this relatively efficiently, but not for free.
No, 5 credits. That's okay.
Yeah, that's pretty reasonable.
Yeah, especially in startup where I think the economy is a bit less robust. Yeah, I like this in startup a fair bit, even though I think there's less good Jinteki code gates. Oh, mind you, you have Engram Flesh in that format, but like in standard, I don't know if you're ever going to see this.
Yeah, probably not. I'm fine with putting this in niche. It feels a little better. Well, maybe. I mean, it's Wall of Thorns with a number lower. Like its res cost is down by 1. So
I could shame it just to make this list a bit spicier.
I think this could go shame. I think this is probably the best of the shame cards so far. Yeah, though.
This is not the worst shame card by any means. But it just to me doesn't make a lot of sense. All right, we got Mitosis, 3 cost double operation. This is the modern Mushin notion. Basically, take 2 cards from your hand, throw them on the table, They have to be into new servers, so you can't put them behind ice, and then you can put 2 advancements on them. You still have a click left to advance 1 more maybe, or put another card on the table. And interestingly enough, you can res those cards on the opponent's turn. Mushin said you couldn't. So this technically means you can do tempo, NGO front, or whatever it takes. This is a card that Jinteki PE has missed for a long time. Mushin no Shin was a ridiculous card. It was the fastest way to put something on the table that could have a massive impact on the game immediately if the runner doesn't know what or when to run, let alone on its own. An install and 3 credits for 0 is an absurd amount of click compression, let alone as a finance card. Mitosis is still a fair bit. The 4 advancements, 2 installs for 3 credits, 2 clicks is technically an econ card to some extent, but it also wants you to have more in hand to work with, right? Like it's a bit more situational than just, oh, I got Mushin and a card, let's go. This definitely sees play in personal evolution trap decks, the ones that want to install advanced that are running like traps like Cerebral Overwriter and Urtica Cipher and Ronin that are making the runner make the right calls. Does this show up anywhere else? It's a lot of influence. I think it's twice as much as Mushin.
I could see Prozivos looking at this too. So at 4 influence, it is tricky to splash for sure. But the like 2 threats that the runner has to deal with is such a big, it's a really big deal. Yeah. Like I think you're correct that like, yeah, having to put an extra card out to get value out of this is a big deal. The fact that it costs some actual credits is also fairly relevant. I will say Mushin was one of my least favorite cards in the entire game, so I'm not super enthused to see it come back in. To me, even though this costs real money, this feels more powerful because it's going, cool, now instead of playing the flip a coin, I have to flip 2 coins, and I'm way more likely to land on tails as the runner one of those 2 times and be pretty mad.
I think like you're totally right about the 2 coins thing, right? And then, you know, like, did they put out 2 traps? No, they put out 1 trap and 1 good thing. So I'll run the other one, right? Like there's so many things that this gets into your head. But I think the biggest thing is that advanceable cards on the table are only really threatening if there are other advanceable cards on the table, right? Like if you don't run any of them and then it's like score Blood in the Water, score an agenda, Neurospike, and then it's a Clearinghouse or a Ronin, like that's when things get really scary. So the fact that it's 2 threats at the same time, I think Jinteki has real game, especially because I think classically Nisei has lowered the power level of heavily advanced cards, but has increased the power level of medium advanced cards in trap decks.
Yeah. Like the different, like for example, moving from Junebug to
Urtica,
Urtica Cipher, right? The 2 advancement is actually where the 2 cards are the same, and then past that, Urtica Cipher is now a weaker than Junebug option.
Yeah.
So that's sort of an interesting place where this lands. To me, this is like the strongest archetype role player we've seen so far. I don't think this gets played outside of the shell game with advancement decks, but it is like this is a huge power boost to those sorts of lists.
The one thing that I am worried about is that it does need a lot of going on in hand. Like you need 2 things you want to install double advance and this in hand, which is hard. Not that the Jinteki personal evolution decks classically like reveled in card draw. Mind you, Rashida is now still totally playable, of course. Archetype role player near the top.
I think I rate this higher than Blood in the Water. I think.
Cool. I'm in. You're going to play against personal evolution. You're going to probably have to deal with this. And this is our last Jinteki card. I still don't know if it's Mavirus or Maverus. I like one of those more than the other one. I hope it's the way I want it to be. In short, Cyberdeck's Virus Suite has rotated, which is a very important card. Classically, for the last couple of years, has been really important. It's also really important right now. Amakua is running wild. I think even like Tapworm is very playable modernly. So having a way to not only like poison archives, but to clicklessly purge credits, again, very important when dealing with Clot, when fast advance, now exists as a 1 influence inclusion from Jinteki. Now, mind you, this has other text on it. It does technically do net damage, and that's kind of in the ethos of Nisei, making sure that the technically the tech cards have other benefits. If there's no viruses to purge, you can still put this on HQ and do something with it, or a remote server and protect Nobukata. Obviously, like known quantity, good card. The fact that it costs 1 influence, we're going to see it less incidentally and now more purposely, right?
I think generally yes, though I will say right now I am probably putting 1 to 2 of these in most of my corp decks just to deal with Amakua, because
that's not good.
How good Amakua and Boat can be. So it's like, oh, okay, most of my decks I'm playing with 11 influence, where I go 3 Spin Doctors, 1 Mavirus, but it's not. I don't. I'd be shocked if the meta settles in that long term. I think if it really does look like we're forcing every corp to play with 11 influence or be NBN or Jinteki, I would be pretty shocked if some ban list action doesn't happen in that world.
Yeah.
So I think this is sort of moving in that world where like, oh, we do want corps to spend influence on tech slots, which is something that we've made that runners have had to do for a long time. And this is Cyberdex Virus Suite was a card that you included when you needed it for your game plan, and I don't think this is any different for that, and is maybe a small safety valve on how much influence the fast advanced decks can slam together.
Yeah, that's true. It's also worth noting Cyberdeck Sandbox, a really good reason why CBS has showed up in a lot of things, has recently got banned. So technically, like the raw value on most board states has fallen down, but still, I think Amakua goes up because of that, and then you kind of need this back. Where would you put Cyberdeck's Virus Suite on this? And does the one influence change it?
That's a good point. I think actually, like Cyberdeck's Virus Suite to me is 100% niche. It's a tech card.
It's wild because I put it as a faction staple. For the last year, I would put it as a faction staple. When it came out, it's a niche.
I don't think it's ever been to me, it's a tech. Like, I think calling it a faction staple means I'm like always putting it in my lists to me.
I think for the last year, and of course that was associated with Sandbox, that was nearly true. It's weird. It was nearly true.
Yeah. I was putting it in all of my Sandbox decks.
Which was all your decks.
I mean, it wasn't all my decks, but that's also why I didn't do well anything this year or last year.
Apologies.
I mean, with no Cyberdeck Sandbox, also the value of this card goes like it's no longer a value card; it's just a tech card now.
Yes,
It's also a more expensive Each to Trash Hakas grid, which is going to be relevant in a couple of cases, probably. Like, oh, I can put this on my Bladderwort and then res it, and now I have a Hakas grid on my Bladderwort. That probably meant I got an extra Bladderwort trigger.
Yeah.
I guess.
It's also it's fine in op. It lets you do things in op, which is cute.
Yeah. No. Op will be a discussion.
Yeah, we'll get there. This is not long enough as it is. So look, I think our language is falling apart because I think that this is technically an archetype role player. If you're playing a fast advanced deck, you need this, but it's also inherently a niche card where there's like some metas you can imagine where like this is unplayable.
So I think just going by how we raid runner cards, stuff like no free lunch and this card feels closer to no free lunch and Stone Ship Chart Room to me than it feels something like Light the Fire or Pinhole Threading.
Right.
Where we put both those cards higher because they have really big effects in a lot of board states. This is a really big effect in very narrow board states. And like if you're not expecting a lot of clot, and that might be why you're playing a fast advance list, you don't even need to look at this in that scenario.
Okay. So in same definition, this can be the best card in your deck in a certain matchup when you're fast advancing or you're losing to Amakua. So it's definitely quite good. And you're going to see this more than I think any of the other two niche cards by a mile.
Yes. Agreed.
Okay. That ends Jinteki. Again, we've talked about the whole idea that most of these are like, ooh, net damage, tricksy, trapsy stuff and allowing you to make cool plays. Overall, I think I'm excited to see the other half of the cycle because I think other Jinteki archetypes have like really fallen, especially with rotation. But overall, like if you play Personal Evolution and you like Personal Evolution, you have a lot to work with. I think P is probably pretty good right now.
Yeah, P is probably one of is the faction that probably the system ban list team seems like they're keeping the closest eye on and most likely to clamp down on. So it might be good to get your fun in while it gets good. But we'll see.
Cool. Let's get NBN, which is looking really fun in Midnight Sun. This is Proud of Us Consulting, a 4515 that has the text of the old agenda called Puppet Master. Basically, when a run is considered successful the first time a turn, you can put an advancement on a card. A click and a credit is a lot compared to a lot of identities that just get like a credit worth of value. This is clicklessly an advancement, which is good. I've played a fair bit of this. I reckon you might have been testing. What do you think of this?
It's a weird one to me. Because I think it does some really good stuff, but then to me, I then go and say, but could I play as Mari instead? And I'm still getting that 2 credits of value rather than getting my 2 credits of value as an advancement on the board. But this does some really different things than this Mari and lets you set up some really different board states. And gets a lot, like basically I would say every card but 2 in all of NBN are supporting this ID. So in that context, it's got a lot of support, and there's clearly some effort behind it to make it be a real consideration for deck building and the meta.
Yeah, it's really hard, right? Like, because you're looking at archetypes and we're looking at known NBN archetypes, right? So you have Acme if you want really good ice really quickly. You have, or even for grind. I hope nobody plays GameNet ever. And then, of course, you have Asmari, which has come back and is incredibly strong financially and low deck size. This thing is different. It allows you to play with so much more of a card pool. I think it's more exciting. I think there's a lot of ways to build the deck, whether you're running like Chekist Scion-esque trap decks, and we'll get to that in a second. I've been playing NAPD Corden and making all my agendas cost 8 credits more to steal. Like that, I think is inherently quite fun. You have a bit of an advanceable ice if you want to like turtle up. Just getting incidental advancements on things you put in remote servers on your like. I think this is quite good. I just think that you have to do a lot more work to make this consistent and reliable compared to Asmari just saying event every turn, which is the issue. But I think out of any NBN identity right now, this is my favorite. And I think it's so far from solved that makes me want to grind way more games with this. I'm also like really interested like in an asset spam list, like controlling the message, mind you, fell apart after rotation for a couple reasons. But like, can you just play an asset deck with this? And if they run to trash your stuff, you get an advancement like that potentially is quite good. You want them to run. Like I don't know.
Yeah.
I think the ceiling on this thing is way higher than Asmari, but it's a difficult ladder to get up there.
Yeah, I think that's going to be the challenge for this list is like, can I make this robust to runner game plans? The ones I've seen that have been most convinced, like I think if you're just trying to do I'm going to, and this is the thing I went and immediately tried to do, which is because I'm not particularly original with my deck building. Oh, I'm going to make a single remote, put a Vladisburg city grid, which we'll talk about in a minute, or probably in a few minutes to be frank. And then like just get some value out of advancements that way. I'll have some other incidental ice that I'm putting advancements on. And it's just felt like this is just worse as Mari. But I've played against some people that are looking more at the assets and kind of traps and the like building a board that way. And there's some really good payoffs for if the runner doesn't run, and some really good deterrents from the runner actually checking those things all in this set, which I think ups the power and interest of this idea a lot. Like Asmari is basically never going to fail to trigger because runner decks are built around playing cards. And so you can learn what to call and get pretty consistent value, or just completely goof up the runner's game plan. And there can be board states where you have no legal targets, or like the only legal target is the thing the runner is about to access and trash or steal or whatever. And it feels pretty bad.
Admittedly, if you did that, you built a bad deck. Like, I think you're right. This can fail, but I think the failure is on you more than the ability.
I guess, but like the runner also has some agency in handling most of these things. Like if we're making the asset version of this list, if the runner like slaps down the Miss Bones and then checks all 3 of our cards, suddenly our game plan has fallen apart in a huge way because we've gotten one trigger, and the runner, if we're only able to put down 1 threat a turn, the runner can respond very easily. So we really need to be putting down multiple asset threats every turn.
I think the asset's probably the least exciting part of this, like just like raw value assets. Yeah. No, but I think you're right. The thing though, like exactly as you said like Asmari, you're going to get your money. Like no matter what, they're going to have to play events. You're going to call it smartly. But like on that same thing, the runner's going to have to run, right? Like it's the same eventuality. You're not going to get it maybe the turns you want to get it, which with Asmari, it's fine. Like you'll get your money at some point, but I hear you. In short, like I'm a huge fan of this, and I think it's very creative. It's very interesting. It revels in interaction, which, mind you, I don't love Asmari because I think it's kind of quite boring. But again, this is not about what I think is exciting. It's about what's going to produce results. Where are we putting this?
I mean, I would put this as a high archetype role player, but it sounds like you want to put it in the faction staple category. But
I think you're totally right that it's not going to be a faction staple because the other faction staples are so much easier to play. But if people are comfortable and like brave enough to like put the time and testing into this, I think that there's a higher power level deck in this than Asmari.
Yeah, that's fair. And I think and this is an archetype deck in and of itself. Like it's not like it's not an ID you just get to throw your best, the best 49 cards you can pull off NRDB and be like, great, this ID works great. It is an archetype deck.
Yeah, you're doing something different, and hopefully that's strong. All right. 4-2 agenda, Crypto Crash. It's a reverse Bizarro off-world office. The runner, 7 credits gone. It's not a Fable, so lose as much as you can. it's always good to have agendas we've seen on the corp side that give you money. How good is it to have agendas that just say that the runner cannot play the game of Netrunner?
I'm not as high on this card. Mostly because I think the agenda suites it goes into, there's usually a better agenda than making the runner lose 7. That said, making the runner lose 7 is a big effect. It's just the like 4-2 I want to score is a not been a thing that NBN has done a lot of for quite a while.
So in my testing, what I found, and again, maybe I've been playing too much Provost, one of the best NBN cards is Seamless Launch. It's so good. Like NBN has a lot of 4-2 agendas that are incredibly powerful. They don't see that much play compared to like just I can do a Beal and like whatever, Bolognas and stuff like that. But low key, obviously Provost trigger or not, Seamless launching this out on a board state is wild. There's a lot of times where you put something into a remote server and the runner understands I can't run now because of credit differential issues, respecting hard-hitting news, stuff like that. So they decide to set up, get money, install cards, so that next turn they can do something, and this absolutely flips the script. Of course, there's like these like I think again Hanukkah land, Christmas land ideas where like you score this and then hard-hitting news, which I think Seamless Launch largely is necessary, or install advanced stuff like that. And that is obviously like absolutely like backbreaking to runners. You know how people play standard because they think it's a nicer format because they don't have to play with hard-hitting news, and then they get hit with this. 7 credits is a lot of money. Like runners are now going from like I had a 2-turn plan, I had a 3-turn plan how to win this matchup, and now they're going like, I guess I'm clicking for credits. Like, what the heck am I doing?
Yeah, I think honestly my complaint is like because this is a 4-2, it's really hard to build a game plan around scoring it. You will find board states where you score it. To me, it's I can't guarantee I'm going to score it. I have lost games now where the corp has just chained 3 of these in a row.
Yeah.
And that's just brutal.
Non-games.
And that's going to happen.
Yeah.
Yeah. I just don't know if that's a consistent enough game plan to make me want to include this over something like a Beal where, yes, it doesn't have the same high highs, but it has more flexibility. Or maybe I'm running a suite of Bologna, send a message. Like that's my like there probably is room for this card. And maybe the like off-world office artificial crypto crash, the 7-point payout 4-2s, what you're getting paid either way. That's good enough. And you just fill out the rest and kind of move on.
I think it's a different archetype. I think if you're right, if you do like install advanced, slow roll as Mari, like this is probably not as important. But I think if you're going fast and loose and playing something closer to like a PD deck where like people have to go quickly and their money is really important, that 7 credit destabilization is game winning, potentially.
Yeah, that's a really good point. And I guess the thing is, HB Ice is not, or sorry, NBN Ice is not as good as HB Ice. So that PD game plan doesn't work quite as well, which is why I'm a touch skeptical. But just to counter my own point, you have other threats in NBN with hard-hitting news that do require the runner to play differently than they do around HB.
Yep.
So like, I'm not too high on this card myself, but I also know it's going to see a good chunk of play.
And I'm scared for the non-games. I'm like so terrified, by the way, in any NBN matchup, what's in that remote server? Well, if it's a crypto crash, I think I'm out of this game. And just me considering that makes me think that this card is massively powerful because there's so many board states where like, if that's a crypto crash, GG. And it's only like turn 4. So where are we putting it? It's a role player.
I'm gonna let you put this one in.
Okay.
Yeah, it's a role player.
I think it potentially could be a faction staple. I'm worried that it's not going to do that, and probably for the better also because it's really not fun when that happens to you. But I would put it like, I don't know. I kind of put it there. It reminds me of Blood in the Water, like a potentially very impactful agenda that's a bit situational.
Yeah. I might personally put it on the other side of big deal.
Okay.
I think it gets as the runners. Like right now, also when people are playing runner, they're doing the thing that everyone does, myself included, where you cut econ cards to put fun cards in.
Yeah.
And so artificial crypto crash is going to feel so much better in a world where runners are like, I'm going to have gamble, laundry, cast, and then, what is that? Like 30 fun cards.
Yep.
And it's like, no, you need to play 20 fun cards or 5 fun cards and econ. In that world, we're like, well, like when the runner's on 20 credits, you feel so bad when you score this.
Yeah, it's really not impactful at that board state. So yeah, I still think if you go fast and loose, hopefully they're not there.
Yeah.
But you still have to respect economy regardless in NBN. So sometimes they do slow down. Looking at some There's a lot of like people in gray suits here in the NBN cards. This is Cheka Scion, kind of a known quantity. It is what is it called? Ghost Branch back in the day, the NBN advanceable trap that gave tags, and this one got the Urtica Citer for treatment, which means that it actually does something when it doesn't have advancements on it, and then it kind of keeps going up from that. So 1 tag plus 1 per advancement. I think out of the whole original core set, out of all those advanceable traps, I think there was at least 3 of them, right? This one was the one that saw the least play by a mile. I think the other ones were much more enjoyable. Now, though, can you play this?
This was one of the cards I got to spoil, and I panned it pretty hard in that spoiler review.
Yeah.
Since then, I've seen people playing, and in particular, the card that we're going to talk about next, the dynamic between those 2 gray suited cards is really interesting and it presents a real fork to the runner when you're playing Profdivost. So I still think this is not a fantastic card, but it does pose some real, like, I think again, it's one of those cards that by existing does interesting things to how the runner thinks about the board state. I would say the fact that it's still completely blank on R&D and HQ is probably still kind of hurts the card a bit, but because it works now with nothing on it, as soon as you draw it, you just windmill slam it on the table, basically, and you'll be pretty happy. Ideally, you want to do it with 1 or 2 other cards, so that the runner has to really. You want to compress the runner's ability to check all your remotes at once.
It's weird. Like the windmill slam, I agree with. And if you want to pay 2 credits, like you have Prisec, which in theory is a bit more punishing, because it has a real trash cost, and then the meat damage is nice too. So I'd probably windmill slam that because you can also attach it to things. But like the way that I see it is install advance, or like install advance, whatever, and then you get Profdivost ability when they run it. Like they're getting 3 tags. You can make this install advance 4 tags in Profdivost. If a runner runs at the wrong time, like basically not click 1, barring deuces or like misdirection, the game can be over with boom. Like this is the wild thing. And while Ghost Branch saw no play, like doing damage with Cerebral Overwriter, like you still have to win the game somehow. Urtica Cipher, it's going to weaken them, but you still have to win the game somehow. This one has the strongest attachment of how to win the game, I don't know if it's going to see play.
Yeah, the fact that this can be a hard-hitting news for 0 and like for a 2-click, or like I guess a 3-credit, 3-click.
You still have to work on it.
3-click investment from the court. Someone will do the math and figure out the correct number there and put it in the comments. But that this can be an HHN for way less cost, and even let you play an HHN as the corp immediately after the runner spends their turn clearing is potentially a real threat. I could still see a world where it turns out to just be better to not run this card because you want cards that actually advance your board state when the runner doesn't check them.
Yeah, does or doesn't, right? Like there's a lot of cards that do that, which is really good. I don't know. I think the ceiling is high too, but it's interesting. I think the trade on credits up front is, I don't know. It in R&D is really bad. That's true. Where are we putting our suited friends?
I think it's a role player, or is it niche? I'm going to lean on you a bit on this one.
I'm worried that it's niche. Like I'm worried that it's a card just like Ghost Branch, we're going to see no play, and then every once in a while you get blown out by it. I don't know.
That's maybe more correct, honestly.
There's a classically an aversion with these sort of trap decks when a lot of like competitive Netrunner players who are more like value tempo oriented players that like largely don't consider these cards. They don't like them because they introduce this like variance to the game that is outside of the calculations they normally revel in.
The other thing that's happening is runners got a lot more central pressure than they had pre Midnight Sun. And so you can put this on the board and the runner can maybe just ignore it if they have the right tech or the right board state or the right APOC, and you feel pretty bad as the court.
Cool. Well, hey, we have another gray suited person. This is Drago Ivanov, another champ card. This is, I think we have 3 or 4 in this whole set. One 0 to res, 1 cost to trash. You can advance it, and only on the corpse turn, 2 advancements at instant speed is a tag. I hate this card. I genuinely detest this card so much. This is like so wild. So we've had a couple cards classically that if you just leave them in a remote server and don't run them, they can convert to a tag. I think CU is the only other one right now, but that requires traces. I don't think it requires a successful run, but like, you can play around this. Seamless launch, retribution, single tag punishment isn't what it used to be. So you're not going to like die to scorched earth, mind you, or like high profile target or something, but like whenever the corp gets a really strong card that can potentially be a win condition that doesn't have inherently a lot of interaction, people hate it and yell that it needs to be banned, and then it's a runner meta, right? Like people get always so upset about unfair corp win cons, and to me, this is a ban me please card. Am I wrong?
I think we can put this in ban me please. I don't think it's going to get banned.
No.
Because I think you identified exactly even when I seamless launch this, if I'm just giving the runner one tag, like Nisei has very intentionally removed a lot of these single tag I win the game cards from the pool. Right? That used to be closed accounts. It used to be Scorched Earth.
We still have All Seeing Eye, which I think can potentially be game winning.
Yep. It's next on the chopping block, presumably, assuming that the rotation schedule continues. And there are runners like that don't play much in the way of resources, or they're like playing all economy resources and you wipe it out and they go, okay, well, I'll figure it out. There's also in the new Netrunner meme, dies to pinhole.
Yeah, for sure.
So like I really like this card. It is very strong, and I'm glad that we got some really strong corp cards, because people were complaining a lot about corps not having win conditions. And to me, the cool threat here is install advance, and now the runner might be like, do I have to respect the boom?
Yeah.
Do I have to respect the Bologna? And that's like the install advance, pass the question back to the runner. That's core Netrunner to me. And so having a card that the corp can play where they don't just lose the game if the runner handles it is great to have in the pool.
I am worried that this card potentially can create an NBN prison archetype, where like if you don't constantly run through like fun houses or whatever attacks and guys you can imagine over and over again, like seamless launch retribution, like you can't play criminal into that has like issues with breaker consistency. You have one of breaker, no recursion. So now you're in a meta where like I have to consider playing no free lunches, like 2 of them.
Sure. Or you could, I mean, like I'm gonna say here, you have a bunch of options as the criminal player there. I could start playing 2 of my breakers. I could start playing hunting grounds. I could, like, you have options.
Yes.
And so I think that's the nice thing here, is that this open, like, runners already have lots of ways to interact with tags. You can play Citadel Sanctuaries. You can do all these different
Citadel
things.
doesn't do anything for this.
It does. So, but in that scenario where you're making me run through a funhouse every turn, it does a lot. Yeah. Right. So this card on its own is as powerful as a tag punishment you can add to it. And so then it becomes this puzzle for both players to figure out, how do I want to handle tags? How do I want to give the runner tags? So I know, like, I'm not going to convince you to love this card. I'm very excited to see what this card does. I think it can slot in ban me please, no questions.
Yeah, it's incredibly powerful, and we saw a lot of decks like Asmari decks that are just trying to boom with this in the last one of the last tournaments, right? Like that's scary. Again,
it did really well, I think, in Brighton. I don't think it did very well in the other tournaments, but maybe Brighton's got the early read on the meta, so we'll see.
I don't know. It's wild. I think this card's incredibly strong. We've never really seen anything like this. It is something.
Well, actually, there's one comparison I think is worth mentioning, which is Breaking News.
Oh yeah,
and that's the card I associate most with this card, where breaking, like, this wasn't a common line, but it was an unheard of line of install advance the Breaking News and then advance boom. And this actually requires more advancements. Seamless launch changes the math on all of that a little bit. Proptos changes the math on that a little bit. But
it's like the fact that you're comparing it to one of the best cards in the history of Netrunner, like, tells you that there's something good here.
Oh yeah, for sure. But I'm glad we've got good cards again.
Yeah. No, I hear you. I'm frustrated about playing in startup and people are just going to prison my stuff apart. Ubiquitous Vig, it is an advanceable advertisement asset. It gives you credit for every advancement on it. Otherwise, stats only 1 to res, 4 to trash. So again, another card we can directly compare to the classic pad campaign. Okay, it's definitely worth saying, when you res this, it does nothing. That's wild. There's not a lot of assets that do that. If you spend time and credits advancing this, that's inherently expensive. That's like a 2 to 3 credit swing. Every advancement is time and credits. You could be doing something else. Your clicks are worth generally 2 credits. So if you physically advance this yourself, oh man, it takes like 4 or 5 turns for this to be comparable to like to a credit positive econ card. So that's not good, which inherently makes this a very niche card, where the only way that I think you can get good value out of this is getting advancements for free in Prov Devost. And even if you do that in Prov Devost, what are you icing this up? And then if you're icing this up, why aren't you playing Daily Quest?
Yeah. No, this was I'm gonna subtweet all of UK here. I saw them going wild about this card, and I went, "What card are we looking at here?" Like, yeah, I advanced this 4 times. As the runner, I go, "Cool, so I have 6 turns before you've made $1 off of this," or something like that. Like,
no, you never want to advance this. And there's no things like dedication ceremony. And I even think if you seamless launch this or something like that, like it's still, that's a very good card. It's going to take so long to build this, and then like I tried this a lot in Pravdivos, and I found it's like a really nice thing to like incidentally get value on. And sometimes the runner knows it's there, so they don't want to run, which is a bit of a bummer because you're not getting your ability anyways. But like there are cards that already do that ability. What's it called? Like tiered subscription.
Yes, that gives you 1 when the runner runs.
Yeah,
I forget what a tiered subscription.
Exactly.
Right?
Yeah. So that sees play in startup. It doesn't currently see play in standard. Maybe, I don't know, things are a bit different, but like it's fine in NEH and in startup. And like that's the same sort of effect. It's just a card that says like, oh, if you run, I make money, but you get the money up front, you res it for 0. Like I think they're comparable. Yeah. Because as soon as it gets a lot of advancements on it, it has to be trashed. But there's so many other assets that have better res to ratios, to trash cost ratios that actually do something that the runner still has to trash.
Yeah, like you can compare this to Refuge Campaign, a card we were not super high on, and you need to spend 2 clicks and 2 credits after you install this to even have it equal the Refuge Campaign. And that was a card we were not wildly high on. And like, yeah, your Pravdivos, like, another thing to think about is in Pravdivos, you're probably getting at most 10 to 12 triggers in the game. And so are you using up 2-4 of these to get an extra buck a turn? Like, it's really hard to justify this. I found even in Pravdivos.
Yeah, that's the thing. Like even in the identity that this, like I think is the only way this playable. It's not a great Pravdivos card. There are better Pravdivos cards.
I mean, we'll just gem us in, right? We'll res our
get all the free
res our Oberth protocol, forfeit an SDS that puts 4 counters on it. We advance it once. Now it's got 6 counters, and now we're making money.
And like Trick-o-Light Battery, there's better cards like Trick-o-Light Battery, a check as Scion. It'll be safer. I don't know. Yeah. I like it more than Hakarl. It's the only card I like it more than. The art's fantastic.
Oh yeah, I think that's actually, I was going to put it in the archetype role player, but no, I think you're right. I think it's a shame.
Yeah, it's just slightly not good enough. I was also thinking install advance like an NGO friend. If they don't run it, you make money, but like you make money in 6 turns or whatever. Like it.
Yeah.
Wild. All right, we got some ice, more advanceable stuff, which again, I think, is this the first advanceable ice in NBN? I think it might be.
I think it might be as well.
Citation needed. Mestnachestva. You can advance it. If you do, when the runner encounters this, you can take a credit off so they lose 3 credits. It's not a Fable. It doesn't end the run if they can't. And then 2 good subroutines actually. Lose 3 credits, end the run, 4 strength code gate. What do you think about this one?
I think it's a really nice card for Pravdivos because you want to be like, sometimes if the runner is handling all of your assets, you want another target. And this is a great no influence way to keep it going. And you know, this is cheaper than toll booth. So you can, I mean, the thing that's bothered me the most was when someone stacked this and a toll booth, and it's noticeably cheaper than 2 toll booths and is still really expensive. And the potential for the 6 credit face check swing is really big. I think in reality, it's very rarely going to happen, but the threat of that maybe keeps the runner from running. Like if you're splashing an ice wall or an Aket, the runner won't know that, and they have to respect this as the Mestnachestvo.
Yeah. So okay. So say that you're never advancing this card. It's just 2 subroutines, 5/4. Is that okay?
It's probably not great because like Black Orchestra just eats this alive. Yes. Even something like Ngolo is breaking it for 4. Not bad. Unity's probably breaking it for 3. Like it's very expensive at 5 if you're never getting an advancement counter. I think you don't need more than 1 or 2 triggers of it to probably be worth it. But you've got that, like if you're having to actually advance it yourself, you might as well have just played a toll booth because you get the click and credit back. And so it's like 1 invisible credit, but a much better card ability to have.
Yeah, if you have to advance this yourself, it becomes quite expensive. It becomes very, very quite expensive. I do think it's like neat. Like it's an older version of a white space, which is kind of cute. But again, the fact that it folds to Black Orchestra for 3 is going to be the biggest problem to me. Otherwise, in theory, it has half the subroutines, most of the subroutines of a Fairchild 3.0, and always ends the run, which sounds good. But I don't know how often that's going to connect. Again, amazing. Sorry, not amazing, but like way better when you come to Pravdavost. I think Built to Last could consider this because it's a perfect card that you advance to gain 2 credits and then you keep taking the money off of it. It's cool. It's cool, but it's not universally playable. I don't think it's universally playable, but it's a nice design.
Yeah. Actually, I think that Built to Last Shadow is good. I think this is probably better than any code gate that Built to Last is going to be regularly advancing in faction. So you might think about splashing 1 or 2 of these and getting Toll Booth for that pays you back.
I think though the idea, and like I think a cat is amazing in Pravdavost. I don't love Ice Wall as much, but the idea is that if an NBN advances a card in a remote server, that gives you like 100% information of what the ice is, and that's a huge disadvantage. So do keep that in mind. This is like, I think it's better than Niche because I think actually is quite good in a couple decks, but it's
I think it's a very good role. I think it's definitely a role player. I might put it, I'm like looking again around that Regenesis Moonpool kind of spot. It's somewhere in that range to me.
Okay, cool. I honestly kind of want to flip these two. I think that they're backwards.
I think that might be right. Yeah.
I think Regenesis is a bit easier to play. All right, we moved our faces. We were blocking the tier list, but hey, look, it's Facilisa. An on-encounter ability on this thing that lets you to pay a credit to advance a card. Not a click, but just the credit. That's still a fair bit cheaper. And tag subroutine. This is, again, like a lot of cards we've seen in Midnight Sun, very interestingly enough, is a reimagining of a core set, Matrix Analyzer, which wasn't a very popular card. Tag subroutine instead of a trace. Not bad. Honestly, not bad. And an on-encounter ability that, you know, you definitely need a deck that can capitalize on it, which makes it obviously a bit of a niche card inherently. It's interesting. I don't know. Have you tried this? I've liked it in Pravdavost.
I was playing it a lot in playtesting, and I've been playing it a bit since then as well. I think it's actually a really like the on-encounter effect, because it gives you lots of choices, and now as NBN you have a lot more targets for it. Like the fact that this accelerates a Drago threat, while also like that unknown kind of Yomi advance, like putting a thing down, the number of targets NBN has that are advanceable and threatening on the board, like has gone way up. Like part of the problem with Matrix Analyzer was you played an NBN, it was a trace 2, and all of the best runners had 1 link, so they were just going to trace through it for a credit.
Yeah, and there wasn't good things to advance.
Really
it was like an ice wall, really, and a shadow or whatever.
Yeah, and then like your other options were like advance the agenda you put on the table. But now we have multiple payoffs for advancements that do win you the game without you having to put an agenda and leaving it on the table.
Yeah.
And so I think that puts how you evaluate this card much higher than Matrix Analyzer basically ever got evaluated, because Matrix Analyzer never saw play. This does kind of highlight the lie of all these ranking systems, because it's always going to be relative to the card pool.
Yeah.
But I've been liking this card. It's, you know, Turnpike is obviously the competing comparison point and is probably better in most cases. But I think in archetypes, especially when you're looking at Drago, Vladisbur's Grid, which we'll talk about, you know, even Mesnechestvo, like saving those clicks on advancement is not an irrelevant effect.
Yeah, I think Turnpike is a good comparison, and I like Turnpike and I like the Facilisa design. It's a card that gives tags, but is not irrelevant if the runner decides to go tag me. You still have that on-encounter ability on both of them, which is cute. I think I would be like a bit like, I think there's probably better inclusions for that sort of slot. I think Turnpike is a big deal. If you're not running a deck that's like really heavy on advanceables, like you have the Mesnechestvas, you have the Akets, you have, I don't know, NGO friend, anything that can get value from it. I've been playing this with NPD Corden, and it makes the remote server really ugly, and I love that. I don't know if I want to play this in most else, because like if you're not running an advanceable ice, it's hard to find a board state where this is always relevant.
Yeah. No, I think that's right. I think, you know, obviously being optional, you can just say as long as I'm going to trigger this a few times a game, it starts to be kind of relevant, but it is costing you real money to do it. So it's like I'm spending credits and then I'm making the runner run through this to then get more value out of it. It's a little bit, it's asking a lot. So
yeah,
it's definitely not a slam dunk card.
Yeah, I think it's I'm less excited about this one than I think I'll play Mesnechestva outside of what's it called, Pravdavost, if I need to, especially in Weyland. Where do you want to put this thing?
I was thinking this maybe is to the right of Wave. I think we'll see this enough. Like if Pravdavost is a thing, I think this probably is a 1 or 2 of in Pravdavost.
I'm just gonna flip these. I think we're gonna see more Bladderworts than Facilisas for sure.
Okay, I think that's pretty reasonable.
I think we're going to have to reevaluate Refuge campaign pretty heavily at the end of this. Because I think it's just sliding backwards, and that's probably not entirely correct, but we'll get there.
Yeah, probably not.
Okay. 2 rare BN cards. We have Backroom Machinations. It's a tag card. When you play this, it costs 2 credits. You remove a tag, which is fun, but then you get an agenda point. This card becomes one of those. So very worth noting that Exchange of Information, the last agenda-based tag card, single tag card, mind you, has rotated out. So the value of a single tag when it comes to like winning the game with agenda points has like totally taken a dive off of cliff. So this is a weird card. I find myself playing like NBN tag me trap decks and not wanting to put this card in because that's a big deal. It's like maybe I can give the runner 4 tags with the hard hitting news on turn 2, turn 3, but like that doesn't matter. Like sick, I got an extra point and cleared their tag for them. Like as opposed to boom, you know, which wins the game. So I think if you're playing this in any deck, it's like the 6 3-pointer decks, right?
Yeah, I think that's the only deck that this goes in is the 6 3-pointer, and you play this instead of your Echo Chamber.
Yeah.
And then like if you're playing those decks, like now suddenly if you're probably still doing Drago Boom, but if you don't like you often want 1 or 2 extra things beyond Boom in NBN. And this is if you're already doing that 6-3 kind of as Mari game plan, I could see this having a slot in that sort of list.
Yeah.
It's way less exciting than Exchange of Information. It's a much lower power level. And honestly, like this existing instead of Exchange is one of the big reasons that CTM kind of got kneecapped so hard.
Yeah, you can float a tag. I think like the worst tag punishment I'm honestly worried about now in turn 2, turn 3 is a predictive planogram.
Right. Or yeah, I was gonna say Retribution.
Yeah. Don't install your boat early. Just don't do that.
Don't install your boat and then float tags.
Yeah.
But
it's a bit scarier. Yeah, this thing is weird. Like, man, I want to like this thing a lot more, but like it's now so situational. Public Trail into this again is a game-winning play that's hard to interact with, but it's not universally playable like EOI was.
Yeah.
Does that make a niche or an archetype roleplay? Because it obviously works really well with an archetype, but like, yeah,
and that archetype has historically been really strong, and so it fits really well in there.
It's a card you need to know that exists.
That feels low to me.
Okay.
Yeah, I think that's okay. I might actually even put it. I would slide it 1 more over. I think even.
Okay.
I think I'm more likely to see a lot of scary. Like this does give the 6-3 decks that look like. This gives them some real legs. Still.
Even is this better than a Echo Chamber? I'm not convinced.
I think it is because it can't be trashed.
Sure.
It doesn't die to pinhole threading.
That's true. That did get a fair bit worse than pinhole threading. Holding up the whole meta, as you said. Okay. One last NBN card. We saw this one before. It's Vladisa Birsk City Grid. It is a really weird card. It's a fast advance card. It moves advancement. It moves advancement counters. You can advance it, and then for a fast 8 ability window, you can move 2 from this to another card in the same server, only once per turn. So the basic way that you can play this is install advance. Next turn, fast advance of 4/2 from hand, which is something that's unprecedented. Classically, NBN has had a Sense and City Grid, which mind you is a card that is one of the most powerful cards classically in the game and modernly does not see very much play at all anymore in the modern standard format. But this is expensive. But the cool thing is that it's still an ongoing threat even after you fired it once. You can still seamless launch, score at 3/2s. You can still advance it and force the runner to do something. So the value of this card obviously changes before and after pinhole threading because it's a card you want to protect in a remote server. Have you played a lot with this? I found it to be very expensive.
I've played with it a lot. I've been trying to make a project of those work where the idea is that this is the central threat in the deck, and I get to fast advance like a remastered edition, and suddenly my threat range of what I can score goes way, way up. And I think it's pretty much a quintessential archetype role player. The 4 to trash cost, like if it was 5, I think it'd be fantastic.
Yeah.
4 is like the upper end of what runners are probably expecting to do a couple of times a game. So like, yeah, this makes them do that, and I think it's pretty solid. It is expensive, right? It's actually often slightly more expensive than the Sand City Grid.
Yeah. And
which does hurt it.
The cool thing about this card, like when I saw this with a lot of the Midnight Sun booster cards, it's like actually a very flexible card. I think you could consider playing this in built to last. I think even some like Jinteki decks could play this, like with a lot of good 4/2s. Like it's really flexible, and then you kind of get caught off guard that it's a 4 influence card. So then you're like really considering playing this. I think if this was less influence, you would actually see people playing it out of faction. And
Yeah.
it does wild things that are
Yeah.
not been able before.
This card also probably gets hurt a little bit by the wasn't really doing much in standard in the Midnight Sun booster meta.
Mhm.
I think it does definitely do more now that the NID is out, which so clearly is basically built with this is one of the core threats from that ID.
Yeah.
Whether or not you always run it, I think is a little bit up in the air, but I think this is another way to win the game as Protovost, where I can actually score out without having to leave my agendas on the table, which is very valuable.
It's one of the best targets to get like just free advancements on in that ID.
Yeah.
It's a role player for sure. How high up?
Yeah. I would maybe I think it's right around Message Festo.
Okay. I think it's better than Message Espo.
Yeah, I would agree. As I'm saying this, I think backward machinations we can slide back to the other side of Moonpool. I know I just argued it the other way, but
that's
I
not
think
good.
the more I think about it, I'm like, no, I'm going to be playing Moonpool a lot. I'm going to see a lot more of it than backroom.
Yeah, for sure. Okay, cool. That's all NBN. We only have Weyland left, which, oh my God, that's going to be hard to talk about. But overall, NBN it's like so much of the stuff is like very synergistic with Protovost. So it's a lot of things that deal with advancements, which is kind of new for NBN. I still think a lot of that stuff is very playable outside of Protovost, and I really want to see Protovost succeed because I'm convinced that's a very powerful ability. Admittedly, like a tricky line to balance on. All right, we just got Weyland left, which I think is probably quite exciting. We have an identity that is just simply extract, export, excel. A lot of text on this. In short, once per turn, when you trash a rezzed card, not from installation by like doing an ability or something cool, you can go search your deck for a card that costs 1 less than that card, install and res it for free. And by for free, I mean not paying credit costs. So if there's additional cost, you're still on the hook for those. Whoa. It's like really easy to look at this card and be like, okay, but why? And then you look at the card pool and then realize, wait, there's some really interesting things you can do. The idea is that like you get this click compression where you can like tutor cards from your deck and like, oh, I'm going to do this, trash this, gain a click, install this, then use that. And then you're building these like tinkering, these like cerebral imaging-esque combos. How have you been liking this? I'm hot on this one.
This is my favorite ID on the corp side I think ever printed. I don't know that means it's the strongest, but it is my favorite. It just gives you such a fun little toolbox and sandbox to play in at the same time. And you know, it's like there's a couple of really important support cards that we will talk about later so that you can actually fire this ability somewhat regularly. The big ones that are not in Midnight Sun, Border Control is the first card that everyone immediately thinks of because you're using its ability. And now instead of just saying, oh, I'm throwing away 4 credits, I'm actually throwing away 4 credits and then getting a 3-cost card out of my deck, which is maybe another piece of ice that the runner needs actually 2. I can install a card behind a Border Control and the runner needs 2 icebreakers to get through that.
Yeah, and 2 runs. Like it's so cool to do a tempo Border Control and feel like you're doing something really good. Yeah, it's wild. Like the archetypes that this supports are also like very wide. And again, it's like another one kind of like Protovost, but I think potentially has a higher ceiling because I think we're like 1 or 2 cards away from this doing like a 5 to 6 point combo in the same turn of scoring points. But like we have seen kill combo decks. You see fast advance combo decks. You see like asset spam decks. You see people just using this as a rush ability on the fact that extract is so good for tutoring. We'll get to that. And like the Border Control interaction is a bit like wild. Like there's a lot of flexibility you can do with this. I don't know if any part of those is better than any of their Weyland equivalents, barring the combo decks, which none of them can do. But like you're going to take a look at this just about anytime you build a Weyland deck and think, wait, is there some way I can do something cool like this in op?
Yeah. The other thing that like I don't think we have the card, like we're very close to, but I don't think the card pool is quite there. But like it's like, oh, maybe with Parhelion could get there, or maybe like it's one of the interesting things about op is like every card that the corp side gets, you look at, like if it's assuming that you can legally put it into Weyland, because you can find stuff in a way that you really couldn't with basically any other ID that has been printed. Like you have to find a tutor card, and this says no. If it has a res cost, I will find it if I need it.
Yeah, it's so
Um,
cool.
and and so like historically, like the deck that I think about immediately then is the runner arc, the shaper archetype of the like, I'm going to pull out value tools from my list when you use stuff like Artist Colony and SMC to just like pull the right tool for this matchup. And I don't think Corp has tech cards in the same way that runner side does. So we're not going to see that exact same thing.
Yeah.
But I could see a world in the future where we don't just have op combo lists, but we have op toolbox lists that are
Mhm.
just about finding the tools that they need to make the most value out of a board state at that point in time.
Yeah, that's wild.
Um,
I'm excited to see more. I'm like kind of surprised that we didn't see more cards that have like the trash like border control subroutine that you were in full control over. Like it's technically less generous than that. I think if we had one or two more cards like this, like oh my god, the power level of this thing, huh?
yeah, yeah. If we had, it's funny how it's like the power level of op. You're like like the ceiling on this ID is immense. Like I'm pretty sure we've started looking at Eternal, and it's like, oh, I think this ID just is too good in Eternal because there's so many corp triggered abilities that trash,
Yeah.
and so Nisei design team has given themselves the task now of every time they put out a card with a trash cost, they have to then go and say, is op a thing we have to worry about now?
Yeah, I'm wondering if that restriction is actually like how big of a bearing that's going to have on the game going forward because that's not a good thing to have to consider on every single card you print potentially.
Yeah, but potentially you could also say, hey, you know what? Border control it's like a really neat card with op. It doesn't break the game.
No.
And so maybe we can say, we can have powerful things as the corp. And this is a cool, powerful thing that doesn't have like it doesn't say I win the game on it. Like but it gives you a lot of flexibility. And honestly, I think at the moment it's more of a deck building like catnip than it is raw power to some
Yeah,
extent.
I agree. And I think we're one or two cards away from that being like a potentially busted strong. Like, oh my god, you can do some wild stuff. Where do you want to put this? Like, I would love it to be a faction staple. I don't think it is. The Weyland faction, mind you, is like weird right now. Like Gagarin leaving was kind of a big deal. That was like the most played competitive Weyland. So there's some big shoes to
Yeah.
fill.
I mean, going by JNet Casual, this is
It's
the
the best card.
Wayland
Yeah, I
faction,
know.
right?
Yeah.
Going by tournament results, we've been seeing a lot more outfit, which I think to me is more a symptom of being early in the meta.
Mhm.
I would be pretty surprised to not see like NWE playing, having found an op list, not playing it publicly,
Yeah.
and then coming out and surprising people with it.
Yeah.
Which, like, I think it's one I'm comfortable putting in faction staple
Let's
because
do
I
it.
think I actually have a hard time as new cards get released. I think the power of this ID is always going to be relevant. Like even unless a bunch of its key cards it's like ways to trigger itself get banned. Like that's the only way I think this really goes away.
Power level of this one in startup versus standard is also like I think wildly different. There's just like way less things you can
Yeah.
play with. So that toolbox needs to get bigger,
Yeah.
I guess, on that side. Speaking of
Yeah, that's a good
toolbox,
point.
we've seen this one before. ICF Protocol 3-2, lovely numbers on an agenda. Now we saw this card originally. Basically, it causes 2 meat damage, but you have to trash one of your own cards. And even without understanding that Op existed in a world before Op, this was a playable card in Weyland. Weyland was classically very good at fast advancing out 3-2 agendas. I think they're a fair bit worse now that they lost Dedication Ceremony, which was like one of their options out to score out. But like that was a playable card in a Weyland deck that just wanted to go fast as heck. Now with Op on top of that, oh wow, that ability, that cost is actually sometimes an advantage for you where you're deciding like, oh, I'm going to trash this to go get a spin doctor or like trash this to go get a better piece of ice for the sport state. What do you think about this one? Op only or outside of Op as well?
Oh no, this sees a ton of play. Maybe even like this is gonna, every Weyland fast advanced deck is going to slot at least 2 of these.
Yeah.
It is a bit tricky to like even in Op sometimes trashing your own stuff is not ideal.
Yeah, it's not always great, but like it's better than anyone else.
Oh, for sure. Yeah. I've had some board states though where it's like, oh, all my cards are unres except for a spin doctor.
Yeah.
And I don't want to trash that. So I'm actually paying the same cost as anyone else. So like this is the epitome of a faction staple, I think, right? It's yes, not every tech like technically you could argue it's an archetype role player because it only goes in fast advanced decks. So maybe that's where it's more
But
appropriately
I
placed.
think even there's Weyland decks that will just install it, put this in a remote server, even if they're not fast advance decks, like the Argus type decks. And I know Argus rotated, but like
Yeah.
Argus would play this, right? Without fast advance.
Yeah. Argus would play this.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Okay.
Um,
I'm gonna put it behind op. The fact that like
yeah.
Pathonymous is up here, maybe we have to reevaluate that. But I do think you're gonna see that in every deck. I don't think it's the most powerful card. Whatever.
Yeah. I also love that like all of the rules complicate like rules gave like I think the op interactions with everything that's not OZF were like relatively easy to figure out.
Yeah.
And then people were like, what happens if I trash a Sansan to score the OZF? That's now no longer legal to score because it only has 2 counters on it and
Oh,
stuff like
whoa,
that.
yeah.
And so it's like OZF introduced all these complications because there wasn't a real structure for how you score agendas with costs as the corp. And so it just had to make this whole new thing.
That's super wild. Yeah. They did also like the what's it called? Reconstruction contract interaction in OB is like really cute with that, where you can get like more fast advance batteries. I think that's a big part of the like the combo deck, but we'll see.
Yeah, that's a good point.
Sphegator Excavator, it's an interesting card. There's also a card like this classically, an original core set that I think was a one of Weyland card that was unplayable. This is a fair bit better. It costs nothing to res, 4 to trash, fantastic numbers. And at the beginning of your turn, you may trash one of your installed cards if you do gain 3 credits. So on its own, you're trading your cards for 3 credits. Not a great trade. But if you're up, a lot of times that's 3 credits and tutor for something that you can start with installed on the table. You will miss the beginning of turn triggers. It's not like you can trash a 1 cost, get a Rashida, res the Rashida, fire the Rashida. It doesn't work like that because you missed the start of turn trigger. But potentially quite powerful role player in op. But I don't think every op deck needs to play this.
I think every good I think every good op deck that is playing remotes is going to play 1 to 2 copies of this because I think getting your op trigger clicklessly is a huge deal for a bunch of different archetypes.
Yes. But aren't those the archetypes? So are you doing that because you want to fast advance pieces? Or are you doing that because you're getting your Drago Ivanov? Are you doing that? Like what exactly are you excited to grab with this?
So I'm excited to sell a 2-cost thing to grab an MCA austerity, making money. I can then spend 1 click on it and then 2 clicks building up my board again. The fast advanced decks, I get to sell a 4 thing, find a BAS or a calibration testing, and I've now gained money while fast advancing in exchange for a mouseless or a border control that I already got value off of being on the board kind of thing. I think people like I'm quite high on this card, I think, relative to the consensus. I think it is such a flex. It opens up the toolbox of flexibility a lot. And the runner often has to trash this at some point in the game. Like if they leave it up, you just win the game. And so it's great where they then have to go and spend 4 credits for something I spent nothing on and probably gave me 3 credits and at least 1 useful trigger.
The thing that worries me, and like I'm gonna compare this to, it's a bit of a deep cut, but like Quarantine Protocol was like a kind of a niche value card, but allowed you to do Jemison things on Jemison, like when they wanted to do that. Now, obviously, I don't think either of its abilities are anywhere comparable to this, but the idea is that it is a card that you need to do your ability, but it is a card that like you're not very good at inherently at protecting, and the runner can trash. And that's what I don't love that. Like I love getting my ob triggers off of extract, which we'll get to, or off of just like having abilities that inherently trash themselves, or you can trash them. The corp can trash them. Like that's the thing to me that's worrying about this. I think this thing is really good in an ob asset deck where like there's a lot of things you can trash to get spiraling like forward momentum, like an Aesop's pawn shop. But I've always struggled to be like, well, if they trash this, I can't do my thing, and then they end up trashing it. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I think it ends up being like I think in the MCA style op list, this card is not particularly valuable.
Exactly, yeah.
But I've been playing a lot of lists that use different combo tools where suddenly this becomes a lot more valuable. I've also done a surprising number of plays where like because I'm not on MCA, I'm on like often stuff like Launch Campaign or like Overseer Matrix. And then I can sell those, get a Rashida or a Spin Doctor. And like, yeah, I don't get the Rashida trigger at the start of the turn, but sometimes you can just protect a Rashida for a whole turn. The runner knows it's there, and you just say, "Come get me." And I don't know. I think Extract is going to be much more commonly played. I'm a bigger fan of Excavator, but I don't think it really will be ranked higher by any reasonable metric. So
cool. So where are you thinking of putting this?
I mean, it's a role player card to me for
Yeah,
sure,
yeah.
and an archetype, right?
And like it's a role player that
Um,
blows open up. Like if somebody doesn't
yeah,
deal with this, you get ridiculous combo lines, but that's the issue. It's like I don't know how to protect this thing. So I kind of put it like big deal,
yeah,
where like the payout is potentially a massively high, not big deal high, but like to get
yeah.
there can be a bit of a stretch.
That's where I was worried I was going to have to argue you to that side of Crypto Crash.
No, I'm good with that. Okay, cool. We're starting on the ice. We have envelopment. Oh wow, I think it's gonna have an interesting conversation. Five duress, 5 strength. We're in firewall territory, but this thing only has 1 subroutine inherently. It's a trash this ice subroutine. When you res it though, 4 power counters is 4 and the run subroutines, but they tick down. Every turn you lose one of them. Very importantly to know, the runner chooses which subroutines to break, and then all the ones that they don't break fire. So the idea is that if you break 4 of these and let the trash this ice subroutine fire, it's gone. So that's cool. Obviously, in op, this being 5 cost, like the fact, like it's so wild about op. Like there's some ice in your deck that you would actually consider, like, hey Nisei, can you make this more expensive because I wanted to get this other thing? And this at 5 credits is a lot of money, but
Yeah.
it's so perfect because it gets border control. The runner knows if they let this trash, there's a border control showing up, and that's a problem.
Yeah, I think that's interesting. Like in a world where op didn't exist, this probably does get printed as a res 4 cost card.
Yeah, for sure.
But I think it's better in op at 5 cost because border control exists, and that's very clearly like why it's printed at this strength or at this res cost. Um, and I am quite high on this card at the moment, and not just because it fetches a border control for me, but because it's because it's high 4 strength. Thank you for saving me
No,
there.
4 strength, 4 and the runs. That's why we're stoked about this, right?
Oh, sorry, 4 and the runs. Yeah. No, the 4 and the runs is why I'm wild about
Yes.
this, because it is like, yes, paperclip breaks it for 4, but probably breaks it for 5 because they don't want you to get your op trigger. Though
No, it's
like you definitely
yeah.
can do it.
Yeah, they have to pay 5 on that. I totally forgot. I usually just look at the strength, but yeah, totally.
Yeah. This is one of the few ice that can have more subroutines than it has strength.
Yes.
And the other big card, like the endurance, hates this card because it's like, oh cool, I can spend 4 endurance counters and then you get the opportunity to border control me, or I have to spend 6 boat counters, which is just pretty wild.
And on top of that, like classically, a very not a flashy card, but like for a while, Weyland played Spiderweb, a 4 cost, 2 strength, 3 and the run subroutine ice, largely because you can't boomerang through it. Like you can't boomerang through this. I love it.
Yeah, it's super nice. And like, yes, 5 is very expensive. So ideally you're playing this in op so that you can extract or excavate it later.
Yeah.
Sometimes because it's the tricky thing with this is that if you use this and then search for your border control, you're not going to then get your op trigger on the border control and fire that.
You don't
turn
want
as well.
to. Yeah. Because you lose it.
So you ideally want to sell this yourself as op, but this ice is really good just on its own, even before you think about the op value. Now, it does fall down over time, but most ice in the game does that implicitly. This is going to do that even faster than other stuff.
Yeah.
But it's, the first turn you res an ice is that like Gatekeeper is really good and has the same pattern, right? Gatekeeper has been a 3-of since release. I don't think this is going to be a 3-of in all Weyland lists.
No, I've also so all Weyland lists is another thing, but I've been worried about running 3 of them in my op list. I think it might be right too, just because if you have 2 of these on a remote server and they let both of them fire, like, oh, it's quite bad. Like if they get through both of them because they only get 1 op trigger. But sorry, I cut you off because you're saying outside of op, do you consider this?
I think you should consider this outside of op.
If you're rushing.
If you're rushing, yes. This doesn't if your outfit, you have Bulwark still, I think.
Yep.
Yes, that's Flashpoint, right? And so maybe you play Bulwark before envelopment, but like if you're built to last, you're probably putting in some AF shards and you're like, maybe I want 1 or 2 more barriers to rush out from. And you could look at this as an alternative to border control. You probably don't, but like I think if you're somehow a rush list that's not built, like it's hard to, when you actually go and look at the Weyland card list, to go, oh, this is the thing I'm going to put in, because they generally have other good options.
Yeah.
But like on paper, this is a really nice rush behind tool.
Yeah, this is neat. And again, 5 may be a lot, but it's also becomes your border control, which becomes your Enigma. Like you're paying 5 credits for that. Like you're not paying for the border control. Like fine, you've
Yeah.
paid a bit up front. This thing is really cool. I'm a huge fan of this.
Yeah.
I saw this originally and thought like, well, this is unplayably bad, and then you start playing with it and you realize like, wait, this is kind of really really good.
Yeah.
The role player pretty high up there, huh?
I think so. I might even say this is past Big Deal. Maybe it's past Blood in the Water.
I think this needs to flip.
Okay, I think that's pretty reasonable.
Okay,
Yeah.
cool. All right. We have another Weyland barrier, and mind you, Weyland loves their barriers, but this is Maskarovka. 2 subroutines gain 2 credits end their end. 3 strength, 3 what's it called? 3
Yeah.
cost. It's wall of static with an extra face check penalty, which is nice. A lot of times you can res this for 1 credit after refund. Do you like this thing?
It's kind of wild how much the power of Netrunner has changed, where I think Wall of Static saw a lot of play, and this is going to see, I think, 0. I think it's a nice card to have in the card pool. When Paperclip rotates, this card starts looking more enticing.
But does it? Because you just cleaver it.
Sure, but then I paid 1 to get a 3 strength ice that still gets cleavered. Like I could play Ice Wall, I guess.
But this is the biggest
know.
problem to me is like this is way too similar to a cat for my liking. A cat I think is 3 to res, 2 strength, has very similar subroutines. It's gain a credit and advance a card. You can advance the cat. And if you do end up advancing the cat to 2, it becomes 5 strength. You can only break 1 subroutine. Like I don't know why I would ever play this over a cat.
It is a little hard to imagine where you put this in over Cat, unless you're a deck that's rushing so fast that you're just never advancing that Cat. In which case, I do think this does become a little bit better than the Cat.
I don't even know if
it does have that higher strength.
If you're a rush deck and they beef into the Cat and you get a free advancement on your Atlas, like that seems more important than another credit.
I guess I usually think of Cat as a centrals piece of ice, and whereas this, I'm more comfortable putting both on centrals and the remote.
Yeah,
because I feel like on the remote, this Cat is so exploitable because the power of Cat is that my ability attacks the runner through it.
Yeah, no, you generally do that on central servers for sure, but like,
yeah,
I don't know. And another really important thing is like the 3 cost barrier slot. You generally do want to play one of those so that if they don't have a fractor and they get through your border control and op, you can pull a barrier. Like it's important to have things at different like costs, but I still think in that deck I'd rather play Cat than Maskarovka.
Yeah, that's probably true. Yeah, I think this is a pretty niche card.
I don't even know it's niche. I want to shame this thing. Like it's just so close.
Shame it?
It's so close to something else that like I don't see like why it needs to exist in the design.
Okay. Yeah. You know what? That it can go in shame. I would probably put it at the top of shame because I think
it's playable.
It's playable. It just so happens that it's obsolete, right? Yeah. Whereas these other ones are borderline unplayable.
Yes. Okay, cool. Last Weyland dice. This is Stavka, Sentry Destroyer. 4/2 is good. 2 trash 1 installed program subroutines. That's quite mean. And if you want to, if you need to, for the whole run, this can become 7 strength as long as you trash 1 of your installed cards. Doesn't have to be rezzed. Again, with op, if you trash a rezzed card, even more value. It's also one of the like if they run last click, you can start doing some wild stuff with this card. Where like, oh, I trash a 4 cost, get an enemy. I trash a 3 cost, get a ping. Like that's fun. So there's like 3 modes for this, right? Like on its own, if you don't trash a card, is it playable? If you trash a card, is it playable? Is it playable outside of op? Those are all the questions you have to answer here.
Yeah.
I think this is playable even like, trashing programs is like a bit of a weird thing modernly. Like all the shapers have simulchip, all the anarchs have bin breakers, all the criminals are scared of this, right? So it's a bit meta position. 7 strength, 2 strength. Like if it connects, it connects. If it's 7 strength and they have MK Ultra as their breaker, like they don't mind generally for the programs to get trashed. So it's not that big of a nightmare. What do you think?
I found this actually is still pretty good against Anarch. Because the idea is usually you want this on the outer part of a server, like every other trasher thing.
Yeah.
And so the Anarch does care if they have to lose their paperclip and then lose their MK Ultra, or sometimes their Rozeki or something. And this will do real damage. And then op, like it's often a very low cost. It's definitely weakest against Shaper, and it's really good against Criminal.
Yeah, you're scared of this. And for what it's worth, like the existence of this card, I don't think changes the play patterns because as it changes the credit differentials and like whether you have to respect the agenda score area. But if you're a criminal without recursion and you're running without a killer, like you still have to respect this. You still have to respect Trebuchet. You still have to respect Archer, and maybe you have to respect Ballista. But I don't believe in that one.
Yeah, I think the big thing that's different about those, right, is that Archer the core path to a
Yeah.
sport. Ballista, they're usually that's being telegraphed by the ID you're playing. In that it's hard to, or sorry, trebuchet, not ballista. And if not, it's still a 7 cost thing, and you're like, okay, I can probably still make plays even if I lose one of my only breakers. I've seen this do. I've been quite. I was actually pretty low on this card when we left playtesting, and my estimation of it has continued to go up as I've played more of it. Sometimes I've rezzed it, and it's like, oh, cool, Turtle was at 1 strength. I don't even need to trash anything, and I get a ton of value. And I think the prevalence of Amakua brings up the value of this card quite a bit.
7 strengths is obviously a problem for Amakua. It also feels like Archer to some extent, like asking you to trash something up your board, even if you're not op. Obviously, op is a lot better. Like it feels like Archer. It's like, do you want to take a big sacrifice? And mind you, losing an agenda point is a huge sacrifice. But if this connects and trashes right programs at the right time, like it's game winning.
Yeah, and the nice thing about this is it does have a lot of, like, for 4 to res, you can often make the runner have to spend way more than that in terms of their credit to, like, even Begalter ends up becoming really expensive. And so I've had people have their Begalter out, and I've still hit them with this, which feels fantastic for a piece of ice.
Also, it's keep the strength for the run, not for the encounter. So go ahead and gank people back into this if they have any programs left. Have fun. But
yeah, I was bummed it wasn't for the turn, because that would be pretty great. But I've seen the other cool thing I did once where I was like, oh shoot, the runner can get in. Oh, I'll res this, trash the agenda I put in the remote server because it's their last click. And so I have some time to draw my spin doctors and keep going.
Yeah, that's super
And
spicy.
the runner still has to deal with this because they still can't let the subroutines fire even if they get through.
Yeah, you just watch out. Like, I don't know if you want to run 3 of these because, again, drawing it in the early game is pretty bad. You want it behind something that, or in front of something that ends the run. So just watch out. I don't think you windmill 3 into every deck. Yeah,
I think you put 2 of these in op lists, and then you look at it and you think about it in some other lists.
I think this is a role player. Actually, it's like marginally a staple. Like, I think every Weyland deck could consider playing this. Like the same way Bathonymous.
Maybe it's the end of staple.
I'm putting it above
Bathonymous. Yeah.
No, I'll put it behind Bathonymous. Bathonymous is easier to play. This you need to care about things. Care about program destruction.
I guess. I think I do care about program destruction. I think it's pretty relevant. Okay. But
cool. All right. Just 3 more. This is Extract. It's an operation. 3 credits gives you 6 back. So Beanstalk Royalties used to be like a card, an economic card that nobody played. But if you trash one of your installed cards, this becomes a 6 credit econ card, which is an absurd number, especially for something that costs 3. Because as far as I understand, there's not that many burst econ cards from low credits. Besides, I think it's this and like Celebrity Gift. But Celebrity Gift, I think, has a harsher cost associated to it than just trashing one of your installed cards. Now, again, the question is inner side or outside of op. What do you think?
Yeah, this is like, there was a moment where I was like, oh, I can play this on my failed traps and make some money back. But like in that situation, it's still pretty rough. It's one influence, right?
Yeah, but I think we still have back channels or whatever it's called that does the same thing.
Yeah. And that was still not CA play. This is auto 3 of an op. Like
it's so good. It's unimaginably good in op. Like it's the most unfair thing that op can do. Right? Like you have a Regolith that has some money on it. You pay this, you go get your MCA, you click your MCA. Like you did all that. Like, okay. It's like Prognostic Q Loop, which has an immense amount of click compression, right? Take a card from your deck and install it and gain 6 credits, but you can find the card you want. It's not just the top card if it hits like certain criteria. Like trash your 1 cost dice, trash your ice wall that's no longer relevant, get a spin doctor, draw 2 cards, gain 6 credits, trash your like. It's absurd. It is so powerful.
Yeah. No, this card is like it can't be more powerful than op, but it is a ton of ops power.
Yes.
And like, yeah, I think you could think like in Weyland, I could see some incidental rush decks that do want this card because they're never going to get to 10, but they could be like, oh, you know what? My ice wall on HQ or whatever, I don't need it because all of my agendas for the rest of the game are going immediately into my remote. And I do need some money. So like it could have a role there. I think
That's
it's unlikely. I think this is more or less exclusively evaluated on its power level.
because like that's
But
a weird thing. It's like it's very easy to compare this to another like real cost associated to a giant econ card in Weyland, which is too big to fail, right? So the question is like, do you play too big to fail, which I think gives you 7 credits, right? Or extract that gives you 6 if you trash one of your own cards. And I feel like those Wayland lists would probably still just play too big to fail.
that's a good point. Yeah. I think probably too big to fail does work better in those rush lists.
Yeah, I think
Unless
so.
you're really hurt by the bad pub, but I don't think that's historically been true for those rush
Yeah,
lists.
if you're a
So,
rush list, the game's over. Also, if you're a rush list, like you don't have that many installable cards, so this could be a real cost. But like you're right, it's something that you could consider, but I think you definitely need to take a hard look at between this and too big to fail to just figure out which way you want to go.
yeah.
Man, this card has been like I've been playing op and be like, oh, that's a cool ability, and then you play an extract and be like, whoa, this can't be legal. Like this is so wild.
Yeah. I think this is technically the top of archetype role player to me.
Cool.
I think this is stronger than Profdevost just in how much it enables op.
Yep.
And like, hopefully this doesn't happen, but if Weyland becomes a 1ID faction at some point, it's going to become the 1ID op faction, and then this technically becomes a faction staple in that sense. But
Yeah.
this is definitely an archetype card.
All right, we got our last champ card. We got to check out. That's Eric Keelback there. White Blade, you might know. Mutually Assured Destruction. It's a triple, so it's your whole turn. Trash any amount of rezzed cards. Very important to give the runner 1 tag for each card that you trashed. It is not terminal, which is something that I always kind of forget about this thing, but it is a triple, so as long as you need to find other ways to get clicks or wait on until next turn. And it's a card that like has a really interesting design story behind it. Eric has basically designed this on a call with June after winning a thing a couple years ago, and apparently the design has barely changed since then. Almost not at all, besides the fact that it ended up banning one of the most powerful Weyland cards in the game, High Profile Target. So cool, Eric. This thing is obviously like very interesting and potentially like how you win the game. I do feel currently, and this was designed, mind you, as a win button, an eventual win button for Weyland Acid decks. Because those are the decks that inherently can have the most cards rezzed, and classically were a bit of a slog to end games, right? That the runner had to run, you had to get the credit differential, you had to econ warfare, hard hitting news weight. Like it asked a lot from the corp, and it was like kind of slow. But the idea is that if you have a massive board state, you have 8 rezzed assets, and the runner just be like, oh, if I run, I die. You can end the game on your own terms. But I feel like that deck doesn't exist right now.
I don't think it does right now, for sure. Like, and so that classically that list was run out of Gagarin Deep Space, and Gagarin Deep Space is gone. Basically, with Mumbad going, all of the good Weyland assets and most of the good assets in the game, or that have been the cornerstone of the game
All
since Mumbad's release, they're all gone. They're all gone. And Mad is not seeing play right now in the asset lists because they don't exist.
Yeah.
It's instead seeing play in combo lists. But I do think it's worth just, while we're going to spend the rest of this conversation talking about combo, this is a card that will gain different modes as the new cards and new sets come out.
Yeah.
Where if we see a Weyland asset reemerge, or even potentially other asset lists and other faction, like this isn't fun to splash, but if it's how you win, this could be the cornerstone of how someone wins in the future in other factions.
Yeah, the biggest issue though, then you have to do this and boom, and that's like the majority of your influence budget. But yeah, I hear you. Like this is something you could consider because it's a win condition, and this game doesn't have that many cards that are on their own or attached to one of the card win conditions.
Yeah, I am kind of wanting to try and start up an NEH mutually assured destruction that then its payoff is psychographics.
Yeah, that's cool.
So it's like, oh, I'm going to gain all this tempo. I'm going to draw my combo pieces. I'm going to boom you, but I get to keep my centrals safe. And then next turn I get to win the game kind of thing.
Yeah. And you could also like,
I just,
you could do like get extra clicks from the Bioroid that does it psycho at the same turn. Like you don't have to make the trash costs a real threat where you like have to survive a turn.
Yeah. This is like all of those plays don't exist in standard, while misdirection and shapers are in the card pool. Because you just can't pass turn with basically any number of tags and not have the runner clear them.
And that's worth being said. Like there's a vanilla strategy to this. Of course, the big issue with this card is rezzed cards. So it's not like you can install 6 ice and then just like rip. You have to wait for the runner to run them. You have to force to res them. Like it's going to be a really long game to the point where you can trash more ice than they can clear naturally if they don't have misdirection or Deuce's Wild or whatever. Like it's, yeah, it can be hard. So I've never seen that happen. So I've only seen this in unfair interactions.
Yeah. So in those combo interactions, this is part of a usually a 3-card win the game combo out of
Yeah.
op. And 3-card win the game combos classically are really good up until the point where the tech density hits high enough. Um, and I think right now people are playing a really high tech density. So this card kind of like it slots in a role. That role right now is combo kill. And I don't think it's like it's one of the only things I've been playing because it's a lot of fun, but it's not. It's very brittle.
Yes. For
Um,
for what it's worth though, like some of the tech cards that other people like, okay, so if you're teching to Drago, you could consider no free lunch to dodge a single tag. But this thing actually deals with single tag tech relatively well. You just have to end up trashing another res card. It does fold to things like Citadel Sanctuary if you want to do meat damage, stuff like that. But yeah, that's worth keeping in mind that it's a slightly trickier to tech to.
yeah, it's interesting. Like this and Big Deal, I think both like are like, oh well, there's a couple of key runner cards that really hose this that are a little bit difficult. And so you have to think about if I'm building around this, do I want to account for it or just kind of assume that no one's gonna be playing in the way around it? But both of those cards give essentially I win the game ceilings, which is a kind of cool design, at least to me.
Yeah, no, I'm excited
Cool
about this.
space to
I
put
think
corpse in.
it's
So,
fascinating too. Like you're gonna think about how to play this, and people are gonna figure stuff out for sure. Cool. And for the
yeah.
future, it's only going to get better because I think right now, unfortunately, releasing a Gagarin win condition and then Gagarin rotates at the same time, I don't think that's what Eric exactly expected. So could have been
Yeah.
amazing just a month ago. Where do you want to put
Yeah.
it? Like it's obviously comparable directly to Big Deal in terms of what it promises, but I think it's less
Yeah.
playable than Big Deal currently outside of combo.
Oh,
Maybe
so
that's
I guess
wrong.
I'm evaluating it in that combo context,
Yeah,
right?
no, because the combo context
Um,
is fine. It's like not, it's not that sort of like, it's something that actually lands as opposed to like, oh, you need 7 things and you're imagining it.
yeah, like to me, I'm thinking it's more around that mitosis and blood in the water kind of power level.
Okay. I'll put it here just so
Which is
Eric
not
feels
much
happy.
further, but
Yeah.
okay. Yeah. Let's make one guaranteed viewer on this video happier.
The funny thing is that what at least I heard from Eric talking when his reveal video, he thought Envelopment was unplayably bad. So we'll put him right behind it, which is good
Yeah,
fun.
yeah, yeah.
Okay, cool. Last card. So there's an issue in Netrunner where there's like a subsection of cards in which I, for some reason, cannot remember the name. Like fully operational used to be one, calibration testing. And mind you, I've spent hours trying to figure out the names of those cards. And this is the third or the fifth in the series. I don't know.
Oh yeah, I still can't remember the name of this card.
It's
It's
just, it
wild.
doesn't do anything. Anyways, for me, the name Trust Operation is what it is. Gray Ops, it's,
I it was in my head as Secure and Protect because once again I'm
Yep.
not seeing the card that's being shown
Oh,
to the
yeah.
viewer. And I'm like, no, Secure and Protect is a different unplayable Weyland operation.
So only if the runner is tagged, you can play this. And it's single tag punishment. We did see Retribution, mind you, in Gateway, but this is slightly different. Retribution was a hardware program. This is a resource, which is something you can inherently already trash if the runner is tagged. Mind you, you technically do it for free. So cool, econ card. But most importantly, install and res one card from archives, ignoring all costs, not just res costs, all costs. Get your archer for free if you want. Wow. To like evaluate this, you obviously have to understand that the value of a single tag in the game of Netrunner is shifting. It's no longer scorched earth times. It's no longer exchange of information times. It's like, cool, do a cool value play, right? Which is weird.
Yeah.
Like it's strange because getting the runner tagged is kind of still hard. Not like,
Yeah.
like you can do it, but it's not like there's going to be turns where they just end up tagged. Like you have to work on it.
Yeah, like maybe one day we'll make it to that world where, runners are like, oh, I'm on one tag, I can float it. Worst case is going to be a tempo play. Right now, people are saying, well, if I have 2 tags, I'm dead. And so I have to always be playing around this and like going to put a lot of effort into making up a situation where I never really have to end tag just because there's just enough stuff that's scary. And it's almost easier to get 4 tags than it is to get 1 tags in certain
Yeah.
situations. So it's just like if hard hitting news, which is like the premier tagging thing that Corps can do in the format, where they get full agency over when the runner takes the tags. Well, I can't play Trust Operation in the same turn because hard hitting news is a terminal.
Yeah.
And so it's hard. Like this is going to be all about somehow convincing the runner that they have to go into this board state where they have a tag and they're not dead and you get the click to go and play this and get something high value out of it.
And it's like really weird because like say that there's cards that are just good enough for you to do like a blue sun-esque, I'm gonna run Big Ice and Weyland, where like public trail into trust operation is worth it for 2 clicks and 4 credits. But at the end of the day, the card that you want to res for free still has to end up in archive somehow. And like I don't know how it's inherently getting there. Like, are you just drawing an archer in the early game and saying like, yo, get rid of this overdraw? Like that's still already really tricky to like figure out what's in archives.
Yeah, like you're like, oh, maybe I can, this is the op set. Maybe this goes in op where I can put something back that I trash. But it's like, well, I'm still relying on the runner being tagged, and if the runner's tagged, am I not just killing them already? Like it's a little bit tricky.
I was just gonna say I'm really surprised that this did not say archives or HQ. Because then it would be like you know what you're signing up for and like you can plan something. But the fact, it's a lot weirder.
Well, the one thing that's made like it's like Archer is the one obvious one. The other card I'm thinking is like, oh, Sand City Grid maybe starts looking interesting. Just to be like, oh, this is a threat the runner has to go and deal with. They're already tagged, so they're probably in some weird economic board state, and I can present a new problem with them for the single tag.
Yeah,
I'm not sold that that's actually any good.
Probably
but
not.
it's the other kind of thing.
It's also a lot of influence. Like it's like one less influence than boom if you put it into like an NBN tag deck. Like you could just try and boom someone.
I feel like if this was 2 influence, CTM might start being like, oh, but at 3 influence, it's just too much because that ID has so little influence to play with at the moment.
So the one thing that I've seen this is actually as like a cute combo piece, because you can actually do this like technically clicklessly, and we're seeing it as a tech card to allow a bit more flexibility to respond to runner responses in ob combo kill decks. The idea is that if you do like a Bast Chiriboga, you get an extra click. The Bast Chiribogas in archives, they're tagged because you're doing a Drago something or whatever, or a Mad something, whatever. And then you play this, you trust operation, you trash their card like the Citadel Sanctuary that prevents meat damage, and then you can put the Bast back, it's res for free, you get your click back. Like that is actually interesting that it's technically, as long as you're playing with Bast Chiriboga and you're playing with a tag punishment, you can trash a resource for free. Clicklessly. That's cool.
Yeah. And that is maybe like, that to me says, okay, this is a neat, like it would have been in the shame pile if someone hadn't found that interaction to me, I think.
Yeah.
Because I think it's otherwise doing so little for something that's currently so hard to do. But because it has this like interaction with basically all of the runner tech being resources for meat protection at the moment, I think it just gets itself out of that shame and into niche.
Yeah. I also do think it's another card that you have to constantly reevaluate when you're looking at ob combo kill decks, even if it's not the best Chiriboga. The fact that like you could pull out like a Zealous Judge equivalence, which is currently either I think rotated, let alone banned. But right, like there's some cool stuff you can do with this.
Yeah.
There really is. It's just,
for sure.
I don't know what it is. Like it's generally response to stuff as opposed to ending the game directly.
Yeah. And for one tag, that's probably the right design direction, but we haven't seen anything that makes it so that it looks like I can get one tag reliably, and so this card just looks pretty bad.
2 tags is boom. Just try a bit harder, dream a bit bigger. You know?
I
don't want to shame it. I think you're right. I think it's niche.
Yeah, I think this goes to the right of. Actually, does it go to the right of everything in niche?
I think it just goes to the right.
I was going to put it to the right of Trieste, but I think to the right of Echo is pretty reasonable because
Echo's playable.
This is a one of tech, whereas Echo feels like a card that's going to see, if not play now, it's going to see play immediately upon Parhelion release, assuming there's one more harmonic, right?
So Weyland got lucky because a lot of the cards are supporting op, and luckily op is not only very powerful, but also we really like it and it's really fun. So you're seeing a lot of cards that are faction staple, and that's actually a really cool thing about the op design is like these cards are playable outside of op, but in op they're like even kind of jacked up a bit more. So like super cool design, love to see it, love to play op. I'm excited for Weyland. I think it's quite fun.
For sure. And Weyland has like historically been a pretty difficult faction to design, and so like when we talk about like winners and losers from the pack, like, HB didn't get a lot of really powerful cards because the faction was doing great.
Yeah.
Weyland has been struggling. It did actually well at Worlds, but that was mostly one group of people with one of the strongest IDs ever printed making it work. And so with all that going, it's great to see some power pushed back into Weyland and some power pushed into Jinteki. I think it shows with how generally higher up on these categories they are.
Cool. So that's our whole list. This is the time where we like really dive into the tank and figure out what we feel like, what gutturally seems like a sitting wrong. And okay, we need to explain again our ranking. I think Drago is like inherently the most unfair card that people can get frustrated with. It's very powerful. Faction staple, fantastic. Feeling good about this. Anemone and Bathonimus, like here is where our list is not exactly linear. And again, it's the idea that these cards will be showing up consistently in Jinteki decks, but I don't think are like immensely powerful cards. I think they're going to be consistent. In fact, if anything, I would actually like flip this. Maybe I'm wild.
I think you can make an argument for it. I don't think it's one I would agree with, but I think it's a pretty solid case you can make for it, in that you will probably always put one Bathymus in a list. You will not always put any anemones in the Jinteki list, but you also have to always respect the anemones now.
Yes. And that's, again, I don't think this is a more powerful card than Extract, but I do think it's a card that you're going to see in Jinteki going forward. All right.
Yeah, I think like if I'm looking at the power level of those cards, they're actually lower than a lot of stuff in Role Player.
Oh, yeah.
But we will probably still see a lot of them.
Yeah, for sure. All right, so Role Player has the most cards in it. I do think we're going to have some misplacements here. I'm feeling pretty good about the beginning of it. I feel like Refuge Campaign kind of just got pushed to the bottom. I think we have to reevaluate that one.
I don't think it's actually this low. I think it's actually probably...
Keep going?
Yeah. I think that's probably right. I may actually want to swap the Vlad Grid mess to Chestfo.
Cool. I don't know. This thing seems more powerful. I think this is harder.
Okay.
To play.
Yeah.
I think you can play Vlad in like Asmari and feel like okay about it. Maybe 5/3 is whatever.
Yeah. I don't know. Moonpool feels it's such a hard card to evaluate. Maybe this is the right place for Moonpool.
You could put it higher though, for sure.
Yeah, I'm wondering if it should go like, yeah, that seems plausible to me.
Otherwise, I think things are pretty fair. Like niche is niche. Again, they're not bad cards. Some of them are just tech cards, but there are the cards that have better options or haven't found a home. And then Shamer cards that we don't like for many reasons.
Yeah, I agree.
Cool. Well, that's it. I don't know whether we're going to have like amazing closing statements here about Midnight Sun, but overall as a set, I'm really excited. We've got some really fun IDs. There's cards that like are exciting, not only like casual players who want to play to do fun combo stuff and just like fun Netrunner stuff, but also like they fall into the good efficiency equations that are going to show up in competitive Netrunner. Do you feel the same way?
Yeah. No, I do. Like this is like, I can't toot it too much, but because I helped play test the set, but I think this set is a like just very, very nice piece of design. Like time will tell if it's actually healthy and good for the meta.
Sure.
But I think it's doing a lot of really ambitious things that Nisei sets haven't historically done. And that even FFG, like they would take ambitious swings and less ambitious swings. And this feels like a fun, ambitious swing, and it's going to rock the boat. And I'm excited to see where it settles.
Speaking of time will tell, if we can, let's revisit this after Continentals, like do a shorter video to look through our 2 lists to see like where we're wrong, what we would reconsider, stuff like that. What hasn't proven to be the case? Because I think that's generally fun. Of course, it's not going to 100% accurate, but it is also 100% accurate. So respond in the comments.
I mean, like none of these are going to be wrong. Of course, we've got it right on the first read every time. But it'll be worth looking. We'll do that video to go back and just go, look how right we were about everything.
It's gloating. It's mostly gloating.
Yeah.
Well, thanks so much for joining me. Thanks again for watching the video. If you have any feedback on this, things that we missed, things that you're really upset that we didn't hit, things that you agree with us, hit us up in the comments. Like Jeff and I will obviously read them. We'll respond to whatever we can. Of course, the first part of this video is on YsengrinSC. All that description will be in the bottom. Do you want 5 seconds to plug your channel?
Yeah, if you want to watch, I'm going to start doing a lot more replay reviews and stuff like that.
Sick.
So and I've got lots of stuff that have been doing that historically. So if you're trying to get better at running and corping, please stop by. I'd love to get more views and more feedback on what you'd like to see. So
yeah, I've been a huge fan. I've been watching for a while. And again, there's also streaming going on, twitch.tv/YsengrinSC. It's all in the bottom. Jeff.
Yes.
Thanks again for joining me. Thanks for watching. That is our Midnight Sun tier list, 100% accurate. Thanks for watching. Ciao.